The words drifting through his open car window made David Martinez's blood run cold. What he was hearing from his own employees in the Sunrise Burgers drive-thru defied everything he'd built his company on. In 20 years of growing his fast food empire from a single window into a 200-restaurant chain, he'd never imagined he'd discover something like this, and it would change everything he thought he knew about his company. David Martinez stood before the full-length mirror in his penthouse apartment, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. Gone was the crisp Italian suit that typically adorned his athletic frame. Instead, he wore faded jeans, scuffed work, boots, and a worn leather jacket he'd bought from a thrift store. His usually perfectly trimmed salt and pepper hair had grown out, and 3 days of stubble covered his face. The gold Rolex that had been his constant companion for 15 years was replaced by a simple digital watch from a convenience store. "You've really lost it this time, Dave," he muttered, running a hand through his unkempt hair, but deep down he knew this was necessary. As the founder and CEO of Sunrise Burgers, a fast food chain with over 200 locations across the western United States, David had built his empire from a single drive-thru window in Sacramento. His restaurants were known for fresh ingredients, friendly service, and the promise of making every sunrise better. The company's success had made him a millionaire many times over, but lately something felt off. It started with the customer satisfaction reports. The numbers were dropping slowly but steadily across multiple locations. Then came the concerning posts on social media, complaints about service, food quality, and most worryingly, staff behavior. The final straw was an anonymous email from an employee describing a toxic culture that had infected several locations. Corporate investigations had turned up nothing concrete. Store managers insisted everything was fine, presenting perfectly, maintained logs and glowing employee reviews. But David hadn't built his company by ignoring his instincts, and right now they were screaming that something was very wrong. That's why, at 52 years old, David Martinez was about to become Dave Miller, a middle-aged man down on his luck, looking to grab cheap dinner at various Sunrise Burgers locations. His first stop, Store Drive-Thru 173, a 24-hour location in a bustling suburb of Phoenix. As he grabbed his battered wallet and car keys, David glanced at the stack of reports on his desk. Store Drive-Thru 173 had shown the most dramatic decline in customer satisfaction over the past 6 months, yet their financial numbers remained surprisingly strong. The district manager's investigations had revealed nothing unusual, but something about the location's perfect paperwork made David suspicious. In his experience, perfection often meant someone was hiding something. He'd chosen to drive his brother's old Mercedes, a far cry from his usual Ferrari or Bentley, but still nice enough to not draw attention in the middle-class neighborhood. The car had over 100,000 miles on it and a few dings in the doors, making it the perfect prop for his cover story. A former real estate agent who'd fallen on hard times during the recent market downturn. As David drove through the warm Arizona evening, his mind wandered to the early days of Sunrise Burgers. He'd started the company with a simple philosophy: treat employees like family, serve food you'd be proud to feed your own children, and always listen to the customer. Those values had built Sunrise Burgers into a regional powerhouse, but somewhere along the way, something had changed. The bright yellow and orange sign of Store Number 173 came into view, its cheerful sunrise logo illuminated against the darkening sky. David pulled into the drive-thru lane, deliberately positioning his car at an angle that would give him a clear view of both the ordering screen and the pickup window. The line was modest, 3 cars ahead of him, giving him time to observe. The crackly speaker came to life, with a greeting that sounded more mechanical than welcoming. Nothing like the warm, personalized service Sunrise Burgers was supposed to be known for. As David waited, he noticed something odd. The car 2 spots ahead of him had been at the window for an unusually long time, and the employees inside seemed to be having some sort of heated discussion. Finally, it was his turn to order. David deliberately kept his order simple: a sunrise special with extra pickles and a large soda. As he pulled forward to pay, he heard voices from behind his car. 2 employees had stepped outside, apparently on break, and were having what they thought was a private conversation. "Another one tonight," a male voice said, barely above a whisper. "That's the 3rd this week." "Keep your voice down," a female voice responded urgently. "You know what happened to Marcus when he started asking questions." David's hand froze. On his wallet, his CEO instincts suddenly on high alert. Something in their tone, the way they were trying to stay quiet while still being close enough to the drive-through window to hear what was happening inside. It all felt wrong. Very wrong. He forced himself to stay calm, to maintain his cover, as just another customer as he inched his car forward. But his mind was racing. Who was Marcus? What questions had he been asking? And what exactly were they counting? As David waited for his order, he realized this might be bigger than just poor customer service or declining food quality. The fear in those employees' voices suggested something far more troubling was happening at store now 173, and he was going to find out exactly what it was. David returned to store W173 the following evening, this time parking his car in a shadowy corner of the lot where he could observe the drive-through operations. The pharmacy next door provided perfect cover, just another customer killing time while waiting for a prescription. He watched as cars moved through the line, noting how some transactions seemed unusually long, while others were processed with suspicious speed. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, Lisa, who was helping maintain his cover. Called. "Store 173 as corporate compliance. Manager claims all processes normal, no irregularities." David smiled grimly. Of course they'd say that. He'd trained his managers to handle corporate inquiries professionally, but he'd never expected that training would be used to hide problems from him. Movement near the drive-through window caught his attention. A young employee, probably no more than 19, was emptying trash into the dumpster. What struck David as odd was how carefully the kid was handling the bags, almost as if. David squinted through the growing darkness. Was he checking the bags for something? The employee's name tag caught the fluorescent light. Tyler. David made a mental note. The boy's furtive glances and nervous demeanor suggested he knew something was wrong, but wasn't sure what to do about it. Just then, a sleek black SUV pulled into the drive-through lane. David noticed how the employee's behavior instantly changed. The casual chatter he'd been observing ceased. The worker at the window, a heavy-set man with a supervisor's badge, straightened up immediately. Even Tyler abandoned his task at the dumpster and hurried inside. Through his open window, David could hear fragments of an unusually quiet conversation at the drive-through speaker. No greeting, no order being called out, just a quick exchange of whispers before the SUV moved forward. At the window, a paper bag was passed, much larger than any standard Sunrise Burgers order. No money seemed to change hands. David's instincts screamed that he'd just witnessed something significant. He pulled out his phone and quickly noted the SUV's license plate, time and details of the exchange. Years of building a restaurant empire had taught him to trust his gut, and right now it was telling him this was more than just poor service or employee discontent. He decided to risk going inside, adjusting his worn jacket and making sure his stubble-covered face looked appropriately tired. David shuffled through the front doors. The contrast between the restaurant's bright interior and the dark parking lot momentarily blinded him. When his vision cleared, he noticed something else that seemed off. The dining room was empty, except for 2 teenagers sharing fries in a corner booth, but the drive-through line outside remained steady. More concerning was the display case of their signature sunrise pastries. It was nearly full, despite this being prime dinner hour. In his experience, those cases should be almost empty by now. Either they were making too many pastries, or... "Can I help you?" The question came from a young woman behind the counter. Her name tag read, Sarah, and something in her eyes caught David's attention. Beneath her professional smile lurked what looked like exhaustion or fear. "Just looking at the menu," David mumbled, maintaining his cover as down on his luck Dave Miller. "Used to get lunch here all the time when I was in real estate. Good prices." Sarah's expression flickered. "The prices changed last month. Corporate decision." She emphasized the word corporate strangely, almost like a curse. David ordered a coffee and their signature cinnamon roll, then settled into a booth with a clear view of both the counter and drive-through window. The pastry, he noticed, tasted different. Not bad, but definitely not made with the premium ingredients specified in their recipes, another deviation from standards. The supervisor he'd seen earlier emerged from the back office, speaking quietly into a cell phone. David pretended to be absorbed in his coffee while straining to hear. "Yes, sir. No issues with the special orders. Tyler's handling the counts. No questions from anyone since Marcus." The supervisor glanced around nervously before disappearing back into the office. There it was again, a reference to Marcus and some kind of special orders. Damn! David's mind raced through possibilities. In his 20 years in the restaurant business, he'd seen various scams, employee theft, supply chain kickbacks, even money laundering through register manipulation. But something about this felt different, more organized. He noticed Tyler had returned to the front, now manning the drive-through window. The boy's hands shook slightly as he handled transactions, and he kept glancing at the supervisor's office door. Classic signs of an employee under duress. David pulled out his phone again, this time opening the Sunrise Burgers employee database that Lisa had helped him access. He searched for any recent terminations or transfers from store number 173. The results made his chest tighten. 6 employees had either quit or been transferred in the past month alone. One name stood out. Marcus Rodriguez, former night shift supervisor, transferred to a store 3 states away with a surprising demotion to entry-level crew member. The pieces were starting to form a pattern, but David needed more. He'd built Sunrise Burgers on the principle of trust, but now he had to assume nothing and verify everything. Tomorrow, he decided, he would need to dive deeper into the late-night operations of store 173. Something happened during those quiet hours between midnight and dawn, something that had scared Marcus into silence and was clearly terrifying. Other employees. As David left the restaurant, he noticed Tyler watching him with an odd expression. Not suspicion, but something closer to hope. Did the boy somehow sense that help had arrived? Or was he simply desperate for anyone to notice that something was deeply wrong at store number 173? The digital clock on David's dashboard read 11:47 p.m. as he pulled into the almost empty parking lot of store number 173. Only 4 cars remained, presumably belonging to the night shift crew. The restaurant's cheery sunrise logo seemed almost mocking. In the darkness, illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights that needed maintenance. He'd spent the day doing research, working with Lisa to dig deeper into store 173's records. The findings were troubling. Food costs were surprisingly low despite their reported sales volume. Supply deliveries were being scheduled at unusual hours. And most disturbing of all, their waste logs showed near zero discards. Statistically, impossible for a busy restaurant. David had also managed to track down Marcus Rodriguez's new contact information. The former supervisor hadn't returned his calls, but his social media activity painted a concerning picture. Once active and proud of his work at Sunrise Burgers, Marcus's online presence had gone almost silent after his transfer. His only recent post was cryptic. Sometimes staying quiet is the price of staying safe. Now, as midnight approached, David watched two vehicles enter the near-empty parking lot, both large delivery vans with unmarked sides. They parked at the far end of the lot, away from the building's security cameras. Something about their positioning seemed deliberate, practiced. David slouched lower in his seat, adjusting his worn baseball cap. The restaurant's drive-thru was technically open 24/7, but he knew from experience that legitimate food deliveries were never scheduled this late. He watched as the supervisor he'd seen earlier, whose name he'd learned was Ray Henderson, emerged from the side door and approached the vans. The exchange was quick and professional. Boxes were unloaded and wheeled through the side entrance, not the main delivery door equipped with security cameras. David used his phone to quietly photograph the van's license plates, though the darkness and distance made it difficult to get clear shots. Making a decision, David started his car and pulled into the drive-thru lane. He needed to see how they'd handle a customer during whatever operation they were running. The speaker crackled to life, but instead of the standard greeting, there was just static, then silence. "Hello?" David called out. No response. Through his side mirror, he could see frantic movement inside as employees scrambled to positions. Finally, Tyler's nervous voice came through the speaker. "I'm sorry, sir. Our system is down right now. We can't take any orders. Maybe try our location on Westbrook Avenue." David noticed how Tyler's voice shook, how he rushed through the rehearsed excuse. In the background, he could hear harsh whispers and what sounded like boxes being moved quickly across tile floors. "Can't I just get a coffee?" David pressed, watching reactions through his mirror. "I'm happy to pay cash." More whispered consultation inside. Then Ray's voice, firm but strained. "Sir, we're experiencing technical difficulties. We'll be closed for the next hour for system maintenance. We apologize for the inconvenience." David pulled forward slightly, positioning his car so he could see through the pickup window. In the brief moment before Tyler yanked the window shade down, he caught a glimpse of the kitchen area. The boxes from the unmarked vans were being unpacked, their contents definitely not standard Sunrise Burgers supplies. He saw what looked like high-end electronics being carefully removed from packaging marked with their restaurant's logo. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Someone was using his restaurants, his legitimate, respected business, as a front for moving illegal merchandise. The late-night deliveries, the special drive-thru orders, the perfect paperwork, the terrorized employees. It all made sense now. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he drove away, mind racing. This wasn't just employee theft or food cost manipulation. This was organized crime, using his business as a distribution network. And based on the operation's sophistication, it had to involve more than just one location. He parked across the street, watching as the unmarked vans departed 30 minutes later. Through his windshield, he could see Tyler taking out trash again. But this time, the young man was walking directly toward his car. David tensed, unsure if his cover was blown. Tyler approached cautiously, constantly glancing over his shoulder. When he reached David's car, he spoke quickly and quietly through the passenger window. "I don't know who you are, but you're not just some guy down on his luck. You've been watching us. Are you police? FBI?" David studied Tyler's face, the dark circles under his eyes, the nervous tick in his jaw, the desperate hope in his expression. A decision crystallized in his mind. Sometimes you had to risk trusting someone to uncover the whole truth. "No, Tyler, I'm not law enforcement," David said quietly. "I'm David Martinez. I founded Sunrise Burgers, and I need you to tell me everything you know about what's happening in my restaurant." Tyler's eyes widened in recognition, then darted fearfully toward the store. "Not here," he whispered. They watch us everywhere, but I get off at 6. Corner coffee shop on 3rd Street. I'll tell you everything. About Marcus, about Ray, about the whole operation. Just... He swallowed hard. Just promise you can. Make it stop. The corner coffee shop on 3rd Street was nearly empty at 6:15 a.m. David sat in a booth at the back, his 3rd cup of coffee growing cold as he waited for Tyler. Through the window, he watched the sun beginning to rise, the same sunrise that had inspired his company's logo 20 years ago. Back then, everything had seemed so simple. Good food, fair prices, happy employees. The bell above the door chimed. Tyler entered, still wearing his Sunrise Burgers uniform, his eyes darting nervously around the cafe before spotting David. He slid into the booth, hands shaking slightly as he placed his phone face down on the table. I swept the parking lot 3 times to make sure nobody followed me, Tyler said quietly. Ray has people watching us, even off the clock sometimes. David pushed a fresh cup of coffee toward the exhausted young man. Take your time. Start from the beginning. Tyler wrapped his hands around the warm cup. It started about 8 months ago when Ray Henderson became supervisor. At first, everything seemed normal, except he started changing people's shifts around, building his own team for nights. Then Marcus, he was our old supervisor, started noticing things. What kind of things? David asked, though he already suspected the answer. Deliveries that didn't match our inventory, special drive-through orders that never got recorded, security cameras that kept having technical issues. Tyler's voice dropped even lower. Marcus started keeping records, taking pictures. He was going to report it to corporate, but somehow Ray found out. David leaned forward. What happened to Marcus? One night, 2 guys in suits came to the store. They took Marcus into the office. When he came out, Tyler shuddered. He was white as a sheet. Next day he was gone, transferred across the country. But before he left, he warned me, said they had something on everyone now, something they could use. The pieces were falling into place. The special orders through the drive-thru. They're not just electronics, are they? Tyler shook his head. It's everything. High-end electronics, designer goods even. He hesitated. Prescription medications. They use our supply chain, our delivery routes. The regular menu items are just cover. Real products move through at night, hidden in our regular shipments. Ray calls them sunrise specials. David felt sick. His legitimate business, built over decades, was being used as a sophisticated smuggling operation. How many employees are involved? Most of us just look the other way, Tyler admitted shamefully. Ray makes sure everyone's compromised somehow. Extra cash in our paychecks that we can't explain. Personal favors when we're in trouble. He helps just enough to make us feel grateful, then uses it to keep us quiet. And the district manager? Tyler's bitter laugh answered before his words did. Mr. Phillips, he drives one of those unmarked vans himself sometimes. The whole regional management team is in on it. They've built this perfect system, using your company's reputation as a cover. David pulled out his phone, showing Tyler the photos he'd taken of the late-night delivery. These vans, where do they go? There's a warehouse in the industrial district. Everything gets repackaged there with clean paperwork. They use our legitimate shipping contracts to move product across state lines. Nobody questions a Sunrise Burgers truck. The scope of the operation was staggering. David thought about all his employees, good people like Tyler, trapped in an impossible situation. Why are you telling me this now? You're taking a huge risk. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. My little sister, he finally said. She got sick last month, needed expensive medication. Ray offered to help, said he could get it at a discount through their channels. That's when I realized what they were really selling. how they were taking advantage of desperate people. I couldn't be part of it anymore. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a small voice recorder. I need you to tell me everything again, Tyler. Every detail, every name, every location. Can you do that? The young man straightened in his seat, something like hope flickering in his tired eyes. What's going to happen to everyone? Some people really didn't have a choice. I'll make sure the right people are held accountable, David promised. But first, we need enough evidence to bring in law enforcement without tipping off Ray and his operation. You said they watch the employees. How? Ray has cameras installed in our cars sometimes, tracks our phones too, though he says it's for employee safety. That's why I left mine at home and took the bus here. David nodded approvingly. Smart. Now here's what we're going to do. I have a team of corporate security specialists, people I trust completely. We're going to document everything, but we have to move carefully. Ray and his people have spent months building this network. We need to dismantle it without anyone getting hurt. As Tyler began recording his detailed statement, David's phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. Emergency meeting called by Regional VP Phillips for all store managers tomorrow morning. Topic: new security protocols. David showed the message to Tyler, whose face went pale. They know something's wrong. Ray was making calls all night after you left the drive-thru. Then we don't have much time, David said grimly. They'll either try to clean house or move their operation to another chain. We need to move fast, but we need to move smart. Tell me about tomorrow's delivery schedule. The following evening, David sat in his office at Sunrise Burger's corporate headquarters, surrounded by his most trusted team members. Gone was the scruff and worn clothing of Dave Miller. He was back in a tailored suit, his authority evident in every gesture as he laid out the plan. The regional managers' meeting is a smokescreen, he explained, pointing to a map displaying their restaurant locations. They're planning to use it as cover while they clear out their operation. Our intel suggests they're moving everything from the warehouse tonight. Lisa, his assistant of 15 years, spoke up from her position by the digital display. We've confirmed unusual delivery schedules at 6 locations, all reporting to Regional VP Phillips. The pattern matches what Tyler described. What about the employees? Asked James Chen, head of corporate security. Many of them have been compromised, whether willingly or through coercion. David leaned forward, his expression firm but compassionate. Our priority is protecting our people. Tyler's testimony makes it clear that most employees were victims, not willing participants. We'll deal with each case individually, but first, we need to catch the real criminals in the act. The plan they developed was precise. Based on Tyler's information, they knew the overnight shift would be when Ray and his associates would try to clear their inventory. They had already coordinated with federal authorities who were ready to move on David's signal. Remember, David addressed his team, these people have been operating under our noses for months. They're careful, methodical, and they've already shown they're willing to threaten employees to maintain their operation. We can't risk tipping them off too early. As night fell, David returned to store No. 173, but this time he positioned himself in an unmarked surveillance van in the adjacent lot. Through high-powered cameras, they watched as the night shift began. Ray arrived early, looking agitated as he made call after call from his office. Movement at the back entrance, James reported through their secure communication channel. 2 of the familiar unmarked vans had pulled up, but this time they were being loaded instead of unloaded. Ray was supervising personally, barking orders at the crew. David watched Tyler on the security feed, admiring the young man's composure as he played his part, continuing to work the drive-thru window as if nothing was unusual. They had equipped him with a hidden microphone, capturing every conversation. Sir, Lisa's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Mr. Phillips just arrived. He's with two men we don't recognize." Through the cameras, David observed Regional VP Phillips striding into the store, accompanied by two hard-faced men in expensive suits. The tension in the building was palpable, even through the surveillance feeds. "Everyone stay alert," David commanded. "Wait for my signal." Inside the store, Phillips gathered the night crew for what appeared to be an impromptu meeting. Thanks to Tyler's hidden mic, they could hear every word. "Listen carefully," Phillips was saying, his usual corporate smoothness replaced by cold efficiency. "We're implementing immediate procedural changes. All current inventory needs to be logged and moved to central distribution tonight. Anyone who has concerns about these changes will find their positions immediately terminated. Are we clear?" The employees nodded silently, fear evident in their postures. Ray stood behind Phillips, his face twisted in a satisfied smirk. Through the camera, David could see Tyler's hands trembling slightly as he worked the register, but the young man held his nerve. That's when everything started moving very quickly. The back door burst open as more men began rushing boxes out to the vans. Phillips was directing traffic, coordinating with other locations by phone. They were executing a complete clear-out. "All units hold position," David ordered through his comlink. "Let them get everything in the open." Suddenly, a customer pulled into the drive-thru, a genuine late-night visitor looking for food. David watched as Ray practically shoved Tyler away from the window, taking over the interaction himself. "I'm sorry, we're closed for system maintenance," Ray snapped through the speaker. The customer started to argue, and Ray lost his composure. "I said we're closed," he shouted, slamming the window shut. "Sir," James's urgent voice came through David's earpiece, "they're starting to power down systems. They're going to wipe the computers." David straightened in his seat. They couldn't wait any longer. "Execute now. All units move in." The next few minutes were controlled chaos. Federal agents emerged from concealed positions around the property. Police vehicles materialized, lights flashing. The two men who had arrived with Phillips attempted to flee but were quickly apprehended. Ray tried to delete files from the office computer but was stopped by agents who had entered through the back door. David stepped out of the surveillance van, straightening his tie as he walked purposefully toward the store's entrance. Through the windows, he could see Phillips standing in shocked silence as agents began securing evidence and detaining suspects. Entering his restaurant, David surveyed the scene with a mixture of sadness and determination. Empty boxes lay scattered across the floor, their contents now being documented by federal agents. Employees stood clustered together, giving statements to officers. And there was Tyler, standing tall despite his exhaustion, pointing out hidden compartments and explaining the operation's methods to the authorities. "Mr. Phillips," David said coldly, approaching his former regional VP, "I believe we need to have a conversation about your interpretation of our company's values." Phillips' face drained of color as he recognized his CEO. Before he could respond, an agent stepped forward with handcuffs. "David Martinez?" the agent asked, showing his badge. "We're going to need your help documenting the full scope of what's been happening in your restaurants." David nodded grimly. "You'll have my full cooperation, but first..." He turned to address his shell-shocked employees. "Everyone who was forced to participate in this scheme, who was threatened or coerced, you have my word that you'll be protected. This company was built on trust and integrity, and it's time we return to those values." Through the windows, he could see the sun beginning to rise. A real sunrise to match his company's logo. It would be a long day of statements, evidence processing, and beginning to rebuild his company's damaged reputation. But as he watched Tyler finally relaxing, knowing the nightmare was over, David knew that this sunrise marked a new beginning. For Sunrise Burgers, The following evening, David sat in his office at Sunrise Burger's corporate headquarters, surrounded by his most trusted team members. Gone was the scruff and worn clothing of Dave Miller. He was back in a tailored suit, his authority evident in every gesture as he laid out the plan. "The regional managers' meeting is a smokescreen," he explained, pointing to a map displaying their restaurant locations. "They're planning to use it as cover while they clear out their operation. Our intel suggests they're moving everything from the warehouse tonight." Lisa, his assistant of 15 years, spoke up from her position by the digital display. "We've confirmed unusual delivery schedules at 6 locations, all reporting to Regional VP Phillips. The pattern matches what Tyler described." "What about the employees?" asked James Chen, head of corporate security. "Many of them have been compromised, whether willingly or through coercion." David leaned forward, his expression firm but compassionate. "Our priority is protecting our people. Tyler's testimony makes it clear that most employees were victims, not willing participants. We'll deal with each case individually, but first, we need to catch the real criminals in the act." The plan they developed was precise. Phillips's face drained of color as he recognized his CEO. Before he could respond, an agent stepped forward with handcuffs. "David Martinez?" the agent asked, showing his badge. "We're going to need your help documenting the full scope of what's been happening in your restaurants." David nodded grimly. "You'll have my full cooperation, but first—" He turned to address his shell-shocked employees. "Everyone who was forced to participate in this scheme, who was threatened or coerced, you have my word that you'll be protected. This company was built on trust and integrity, and it's time we return to those values." Through the windows, he could see the sun beginning to rise, a real sunrise to match his company's logo. It would be a long day of statements, evidence processing, and beginning to rebuild his company's damaged reputation. But as he watched Tyler finally relaxing, knowing the nightmare was over, David knew that this sunrise marked a new beginning for Sunrise Burgers. 3 months after the late-night raid at store number 173, David Martinez stood before a packed room at Sunrise Burgers headquarters. The audience included employees from all levels of the company, law enforcement representatives, and members of the press. The room hummed with anticipation as he approached the podium. "6 months ago," David began, his voice carrying clearly. "Through the space, I sat in a drive-through line and overheard a conversation that would uncover one of the largest criminal enterprises ever hidden within a legitimate business." He paused, looking across the faces before him. "Today, I'm here to share not just what we discovered, but more importantly, how we're making it right." The investigation had revealed the full scope of Phillips and Ray's operation. 7 Sunrise Burgers' locations had been used as distribution points for stolen goods and illegal pharmaceuticals. The network had generated millions in illegal profits, all while terrorizing employees and exploiting the company's reputation. "The criminal case has been resolved," David continued, gesturing to the federal agents present. 15 arrests have been made, including former regional VP Phillips and 6 store managers. But our work isn't finished. Today, we're announcing comprehensive changes to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. He clicked to the first slide, displaying the company's new organizational structure. "We're implementing a triple verification system for all inventory and deliveries. Every shipment will be monitored in real time through blockchain technology, but more importantly, we're changing how we support and protect our employees." Sarah, the former counterworker from store number 173, now stood proudly in a manager's uniform as David acknowledged her. "Our new whistleblower protection program isn't just a policy. It's a promise. Any employee who reports suspicious activity will receive immediate support and protection. We've established a 24/7 ethics hotline staffed by an independent third party. The screen changed to show Marcus Rodriguez, the former supervisor who had first noticed the criminal activity. He had returned from his forced transfer and now held a position in corporate compliance. Marcus showed tremendous courage in trying to expose this operation, David said, his voice thick with emotion. He paid a heavy price for doing the right thing. That's why we've created the Rodriguez Integrity Award, recognizing employees who demonstrate exceptional ethical leadership. Tyler, sitting in the front row, smiled as David continued. The young man had been instrumental in bringing down the criminal enterprise, and his sister was now receiving proper medical care through the company's enhanced healthcare program. But perhaps our most significant change, David announced, is the creation of the Sunrise Employee Trust Fund. We've established a $50 million foundation to support employees facing personal hardships. This fund will be independently managed, with complete transparency and oversight. He moved away from the podium, speaking more personally now. When I founded this company, I had a simple vision. Make good food, treat people right, and build something we could all be proud of. Somewhere along the way, we let procedures and profits overshadow our people. That ends today. The screen behind him filled with images of Sunrise Burgers locations across the country, each showing employees and customers sharing moments of genuine connection. Every Sunrise represents a new beginning. That's why it's our logo. And that's what today represents. For our company, David then revealed the company's complete operational overhaul. Store managers would now rotate regularly to prevent isolated power structures. Employees would have direct access to corporate resources without going through regional management. Regular undercover assessments would be conducted by trained professionals. But perhaps most importantly, David said, picking up a new employee handbook, we're changing our culture. Every policy, every procedure, every decision will be guided by a simple question. Are we doing right by our people? He invited Tyler to join him at the podium. The young man who had risked everything to expose the truth now stood tall as David announced his promotion to head the new Employee Advocacy Department. Tyler taught me something valuable, David shared. Sometimes the most important voices are the ones speaking in whispers behind the drive-through window. From now on, we're going to listen to every voice. The presentation concluded with the unveiling of Sunrise Burger's new mission statement. Every sunrise brings a chance to do better. Every person deserves to be heard. Every meal is an opportunity to serve with integrity. Later that evening, David visited store number 173, now transformed with new management and renewed purpose. The drive-through line was busy, but this time with legitimate customers being served by confident, happy employees. The restaurant's windows gleamed, and the Sunrise logo seemed to shine brighter against the twilight sky. He pulled into the drive-through line, this time in his own car, no disguise necessary. When he reached the window, he was greeted by a young employee whose name tag bore the new company motto about integrity. The transaction was smooth, professional, and completely ordinary, exactly as it should be. As David drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror at the restaurant growing smaller behind him. The criminal enterprise had been destroyed, but something stronger had been built in its place, a company that truly lived up to its promise of making every sunrise better. The next morning, as David prepared for another day of implementing changes and rebuilding trust, he received a text from Tyler. Just finished training our new ethics compliance team. You should see how excited everyone is about the changes. We're not just serving food anymore, we're serving hope. David smiled, remembering those frightening whispers he'd heard in the drive-thru months ago. Sometimes the darkest moments truly did lead to the brightest dawns. Sunrise Burgers wasn't just a restaurant chain anymore. It was a testament to the power of doing the right thing, no matter the cost. 1 month after implementing the sweeping changes at Sunrise Burgers, David Martinez sat in his office, reviewing the latest company reports. The enhanced transparency measures had revealed something unexpected, a pattern of financial discrepancies that predated Phillips and Ray's operation by several years. "Look at these numbers," Lisa said, spreading documents across his desk. "Store number 291 in Portland shows the same irregular inventory patterns we found in number 173, but from 3 years ago, before Phillips was even regional VP. David leaned forward, studying the highlighted figures. The similarities were undeniable: subtle variations in food costs, unusual delivery schedules, and perfectly maintained paperwork that looked too good to be true. Just like store number 173, but with a different cast of characters. "Who was managing that location back then?" David asked, already pulling up the employee database on his computer. "That's the interesting part," Lisa replied, sliding over another document. "Michael Conway. He left the company 2 years ago to start his own restaurant consulting firm. But here's where it gets strange. His firm now works with 7 major fast food chains across the country." The implications made David's stomach turn. If Conway had perfected this scheme at Sunrise Burgers before Phillips and Ray, could he be implementing similar operations elsewhere? A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Tyler entered, looking troubled. Since his promotion to head of employee advocacy, he'd been traveling to different locations, training staff on the new reporting systems. "We might have a problem," Tyler said, closing the door behind him. "I just got back from our Seattle locations. Remember how Marcus said he was threatened to keep quiet? I found 3 other former employees with similar stories, but from different years, different managers." David shared a look with Lisa. "Different managers, same playbook," he muttered. "Tyler, what exactly did these employees tell you?" "Each one noticed inventory irregularities, tried to report it, and was suddenly transferred or pressured to quit. But here's the weird part. They all mentioned receiving the same warning. The sunrise burns those who look directly at it." David felt a chill run down his spine. The same phrase had been found in Ray's text messages during the investigation. This isn't a coincidence. Someone taught them that line. He pulled up the company's historical org chart. "Look at the pattern. Conway was store manager, while Phillips was still a shift supervisor. 3 years later, Conway leaves. Phillips gets promoted to regional VP and implements the same scheme, but bigger." "You think Conway trained Phillips?" Lisa asked. "I think Conway perfected the system using our store as a test run," David replied grimly, "then expanded it through his consulting firm. Phillips and Ray weren't the masterminds. They were franchisees of a bigger criminal enterprise." Tyler sank into a chair, so dismantling their operation at 173 was just cutting off one head of the Hydra, David finished. "The real question is, how many other restaurants' chains are being used for similar schemes?" Lisa was already pulling data on Conway's consulting firm. He's worked with over 30 locations across different chains in the past 2 years, each contract lasting exactly 6 months, long enough to set up an operation and train local management. "We need to be careful here," David cautioned. "Conway's built himself a legitimate business cover. We can't just accuse him without proof. And if he's really behind all this, he's obviously smarter and more connected than Phillips ever was." "I might have something," Tyler said, pulling out his phone. "One of the former employees I interviewed, she kept a journal. Written records of everything she noticed, including meetings between Conway and some people she said didn't look like restaurant industry types. She was too scared to come forward before, but with our new protection programs." David stood up, decision made. "Get her in here quietly. Lisa, I want everything you can find on Conway's consulting firm. Business records, client lists, employee movements between companies. Tyler, reach out to your counterparts at other chains. Carefully, see if they've noticed similar patterns. What are you going to do? Lisa asked. David walked to his window, looking out at the city below. I'm going to make some calls. If Conway's using the restaurant industry as a cover for organized crime, he's not just betraying my company, he's betraying every honest business owner in the country. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, now working in compliance. Emergency at store, shirt 291. Need you here ASAP. Don't tell anyone you're coming. Change of plans, David announced, grabbing his jacket. I'm going to Portland. Tyler, you're with me. Lisa, get me everything you can on store number 291's current operations. If Conway's original test site is still active, be careful, Lisa warned. If this goes as deep as we think. I know, David replied, but we've already seen what happens when good people stay quiet. Time to find out just how far this sunrise really reaches. Store number 291 sat on a rain-slicked corner in downtown Portland, its windows gleaming under streetlights that caught the endless Pacific Northwest drizzle. David and Tyler pulled into the parking lot at 11 p.m., their rental car deliberately chosen to be as unremarkable as possible. Marcus said to meet him by the loading dock, Tyler murmured, checking his phone. The message had come through on their secure communication system, implemented after the events at store number 173. As they approached the back of the building, David noticed something odd. The security light above the loading dock was out, the only dark spot in an otherwise well-lit property. Marcus emerged from the shadows, his face tense. You need to see this, he said without preamble, leading them through the employee entrance. Third shift manager called in sick. I'm covering, which gave me access to their private office. The back office of store number 291 looked ordinary enough. Desk, computer, filing cabinets. But Marcus went straight to the corner, kneeling by what appeared to be a standard electrical panel. Watch, he said, pressing a hidden catch. The panel swung open, revealing a sophisticated computer setup. Found this behind the breaker box. It's a separate system, completely isolated from our network. I recognized it because we had the same setup at number 173, but this one's older. David examined the equipment, the original blueprint, Conway's test model before Phillips expanded it. That's not all, Marcus continued, pulling out a USB drive. I managed to copy some files before the encryption kicked in. Look at these, shipping manifests. Tyler connected the drive to his laptop, and they huddled around the screen. The documents showed a complex web of shipments, all carefully disguised as routine restaurant supplies. These routes, David pointed at the screen, they don't just connect our stores. Look at the delivery points. They match locations where Conway consulted after leaving Sunrise Burgers. But here's what really caught my attention, Marcus said, scrolling to another document. Employee transfers. Conway didn't just move products, he moved people. Key employees from 291 were shifted to other chains right after his consulting visits. Spreading the system, Tyler realized, training new operators at each location. A noise from the front of the store made them all freeze. Through the office window, they could see two men entering through the main doors, definitely not employees. Back exit, David whispered. Now. They slipped out just as voices approached the office. In the safety of their car, Marcus shared what he'd overheard earlier that evening. The night shift manager didn't just call in sick, he called me in specifically, said it was important I cover tonight. Then I found this taped under the desk. He handed David a note. The handwriting was shaky but legible. They're cleaning. House. Conway knows someone's looking into the old operations. Be careful. David's phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. Conway just booked a flight to Portland, landing in 3 hours. He's coming to check on this location personally, David said. Question is, did someone tip him off about our investigation, or is this a routine inspection? Either way, Tyler added, we need to move fast. If he wipes that system, he won't, David decided, because we're going to beat him to it. Marcus, you said the night manager called you in specifically? Marcus nodded. Jake's been here 10 years. He's seen everything. Then he's our key. Where would he go if he's running scared? Marcus thought for a moment. The Nighthawk Diner. It's where employees go after shift. Jake practically lives there. 20 minutes later, they walked into the 24-hour diner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a handful of late-night customers nursed coffee cups. In a corner booth, a man in a Sunrise Burgers manager uniform sat alone, staring into a cold cup of coffee. David slid into the booth across from Jake while Tyler and Marcus took positions where they could watch the door. Hello, Jake, David said quietly. I believe you have something to tell me about Michael Conway. Jake's hands trembled slightly. You don't understand. He has everything. Documented. Every person who ever looked the other way, every favor accepted, every compromise made. He doesn't just own the operation. He owns everyone who ever touched it. That's why you called Marcus in tonight? To find the evidence? Jake nodded, miserably. Conway's been calling old contacts, checking his foundation, when I heard he was flying in. He pulled out a thick envelope. I've been keeping records for years, dates, names, locations, everything I was too scared to report before. But if he's coming here personally, we can protect you, David assured him. But we need to know everything, from the beginning. Jake glanced nervously at the diner's windows before speaking. It didn't start as anything illegal. Conway was brilliant with logistics, found ways to maximize efficiency. But then he started noticing gaps in the system, ways to move things through restaurant supply chains without detection. He called it optimization at first. When did it change? About 5 years ago. Some men in expensive suits started visiting. Next thing we knew, we're handling special deliveries through the drive-thru. Conway developed the whole system right here. The codes, the hidden computers, the employee manipulation. Once he perfected it, he left to sell it to other chains, David finished. Jake's phone buzzed. The color drained from his face as he read the message. He's landing early. Conway's already at the airport. David looked at the envelope of evidence, then at Jake's frightened face. They had maybe an hour before Conway reached store deal 291. Whatever they were going to do, they had to do it now. Store number 291 sat on a rain-slicked corner in downtown Portland, its windows gleaming under streetlights that caught the endless Pacific Northwest drizzle. David and Tyler pulled into the parking lot at 11 p.m., their rental car deliberately chosen to be as unremarkable as possible. Marcus said to meet him by the loading dock, Tyler murmured, checking his phone. The message had come through on their secure communication system, implemented after the events at store number 173. As they approached the back of the building, David noticed something odd. The security light above the loading dock was out, the only dark spot in an otherwise well-lit property. Marcus emerged from the shadows, his face tense. You need to see this, he said without preamble, leading them through the employee entrance. Third shift manager called in sick. I'm covering, which gave me access to their private office. The back office of store number 291 looked ordinary enough. Desk, computer, filing cabinets. But Marcus went straight to the corner, kneeling by what appeared to be a standard electrical panel. Watch, he said, pressing a hidden catch. The panel swung open, revealing a sophisticated computer setup. Found this behind the breaker box. It's a separate system, completely isolated from our network. I recognized it because we had the same setup at num 173, but this one's older. David examined the equipment, the original blueprint, Conway's test model before Phillips expanded it. That's not all, Marcus continued, pulling out a USB drive. I managed to copy some files before the encryption kicked in. Look at these. Shipping manifests. Tyler connected the drive to his laptop, and they huddled around the screen. The documents showed a complex web of shipments, all carefully disguised as routine restaurant supplies. These routes, David pointed at the screen, they don't just connect our stores. Look at the delivery points. They match locations where Conway consulted after leaving Sunrise Burgers. But here's what really caught my attention, Marcus said, scrolling to another document. Employee transfers. Conway didn't just move products, he moved people. Key employees from Nupla 291 were shifted to other chains right after his consulting visits. Spreading the system, Tyler realized, training new operators at each location. A noise from the front of the store made them all freeze. Through the office window, they could see two men entering through the main doors, definitely not employees. Back exit, David whispered. Now. They slipped out just as voices approached the office. In the safety of their car, Marcus shared what he'd overheard earlier that evening. The night shift manager didn't just call in sick. He called me in specifically, said it was important I cover tonight. Then I found this taped under the desk. He handed David a note. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. They're cleaning house. Conway knows someone's looking into the old operations. Be careful. David's phone buzzed, a text from Lisa. Conway just booked a flight to Portland, landing in 3 hours. He's coming to check on this location personally, David said. Question is, did someone tip him off about our investigation, or is this a routine inspection? Either way, Tyler added, we need to move fast if he wipes that system. He won't, David decided, because we're going to beat him to it. Marcus, you said the night manager called you in specifically. Marcus nodded. Jake's been here 10 years. He's seen everything. Then he's our key. Where would he go if he's running scared? Marcus thought for a moment. The Nighthawk Diner. It's where employees go after shift. Jake practically lives there. 20 minutes later, they walked into the 24-hour diner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a handful of late-night customers nursed coffee cups. In the corner booth, a man in a Sunrise Burgers manager uniform sat alone, staring into a cold cup of coffee. David slid into the booth across from Jake while Tyler and Marcus took positions where they could watch the door. Hello, Jake, David said quietly. I believe you have something to tell me about Michael Conway. Jake's hands trembled slightly. You don't understand. He has everything documented, every person who ever looked the other way, every favor accepted, every compromise made. He doesn't just own the operation, he owns everyone who ever touched it. That's why you called Marcus in tonight, to find the evidence. Jake nodded miserably. Conway's been calling old contacts, checking his foundation, when I heard he was flying in. He pulled out a thick envelope. I've been keeping records for years, dates, names, locations, everything I was too scared to report before. But if he's coming here personally, we can protect you, David assured him, but we need to know everything, from the beginning. Jake glanced nervously at the diner's windows before speaking. It didn't start as anything illegal. Conway was brilliant with logistics, found ways to maximize efficiency. But then he started noticing gaps in the system, ways to move things through restaurant supply chains without detection. He called it optimization at first. When did it change? About 5 years ago. Some men in expensive suits started visiting. Next thing we knew, we're handling special deliveries through the drive-thru. Conway developed the whole system right here. The codes, the hidden computers, the employee manipulation. Once he perfected it, he left to sell it to other chains, David finished. Jake's phone buzzed. The color drained from his face. As he read the message, he's landing early. Conway's already at the airport. David looked at the envelope of evidence, then at Jake's frightened face. They had maybe an hour before Conway reached store number 291. Whatever they were going to do, they had to do it now. The Nighthawk Diner's neon sign cast alternating blue and red shadows across their faces as David and his team formulated their plan. They had less than an hour before Conway would reach store number 291, and every minute was precious. "We can't just copy the files," Tyler said, studying the technical specifications on his laptop. "The system Conway installed has a deadman switch. Any unauthorized access triggers an automatic wipe." Marcus leaned forward, his coffee untouched. "What about the physical evidence? Jake's records, the shipping manifests?" "Not enough on their own," David replied. "We need the digital trail to prove the connection between Conway's consulting work and the criminal operations. Otherwise, it's just circumstantial." Jake, who had been quiet for several minutes, suddenly straightened. "There might be another way. Conway's thorough, but he's also arrogant. He keeps a personal record of everything, his insurance policy against anyone turning on him." "Where?" David asked. "His laptop. He never lets it out of his sight." "But Jake glanced at his phone. "He always stays at the Madison Hotel when he's in Portland, Suite 1412. It's reserved year-round under his company's name." David's mind raced through possibilities. "How do you know this?" "Because I'm the one who made the permanent reservation 3 years ago, part of the special services we provided, maintaining his home away from home." Lisa's voice came through David's earpiece. She'd been listening to the entire conversation from headquarters. "I can confirm. Madison Hotel shows a permanent booking for Suite 1412 under Conway Consulting, LLC. "The laptop will be encrypted," Tyler warned. Jake shook his head. "Conway's password hasn't changed in years. It's his daughter's birthday, plus the location code of his first Sunrise Burgers store. He thinks no one knows about his family." David checked his watch. "Conway's landing in 40 minutes. He'll check in at the hotel first. He always follows the same routine. That gives us a narrow window while he visits the store." "I have the hotel's layout," Lisa reported. "Security's tight, but there's a service elevator with access to all floors." "It's too risky," Marcus protested. "If we're caught, we're not breaking in," David said firmly. "We're going to walk right through the front door." He turned to Jake. "You said you handled Conway's arrangements. Does the hotel staff know you?" Understanding dawned on Jake's face. "Yes. I've coordinated his stays for years. They know me as his personal assistant." Good. Tyler, your IT support, called in to update his laptop before an important meeting. Marcus, you'll watch the lobby. I'll monitor Conway's movements at the store." "What about me?" Jake asked. "You'll do exactly what you'd normally do. Escort Conway's IT support to his room. Business as usual." Lisa's voice crackled through the earpiece again. "Conway's just landed. His rideshare is headed to the Madison." They moved quickly, splitting up according to the plan. Tyler changed into a crisp shirt and tie, looking every bit the corporate IT professional. Jake made a call to the hotel's front desk, informing them that Mr. Conway's IT team would need access to prepare for tomorrow's meetings. David positioned himself in the restaurant's parking lot, watching as Conway's car pulled up to the hotel entrance. Even from a distance, Michael Conway cut an impressive figure, tall, distinguished, carrying himself with the confidence of someone used to being in control. "Target is entering the hotel," Marcus reported from his position in the lobby, heading straight for the elevator. They waited tensely until Conway emerged 15 minutes later, heading toward store Drive-Thru 291. As soon as his car pulled away, David gave the signal. Jake and Tyler walked into the hotel lobby, their timing perfect, as the evening shift manager greeted them warmly. "Evening, Mr. Harrison. Mr. Conway mentioned you'd be sending someone up." David listened through their comms, as Jake smoothly handled the interaction. Years of playing his part made the deception effortless. Within minutes, they were in the elevator heading to the 14th floor. "Conway's 5 minutes out from the store," David reported, watching through his windshield as the consultant's car navigated Portland's rain-slicked streets. In Suite 1412, Tyler worked with practiced efficiency. The laptop was exactly where Jake said it would be. Conway's habits were indeed predictable. The password worked on the first try. "I'm in," Tyler reported. "But there's a lot here, multiple, encrypted folders." "Start with the most recent," David instructed. "Lisa, are you getting this?" "Coming through now," she confirmed. "Downloading everything to secure servers." The minutes ticked by tensely as Tyler copied files. In the store parking lot, David watched Conway enter through the front door, his bearing radiating authority. "He's starting his inspection," David narrated, heading toward the back office. "Need 2 more minutes," Tyler muttered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Conway's voice suddenly came through David's earpiece. He was close enough to the bug they'd planted earlier to be. Heard clearly. "Where's Jake? He was supposed to be here." "Download complete," Tyler announced, "initiating system restore to hide our tracks." "Get out now," David ordered. Conway's already asking questions. Jake and Tyler made it back to the lobby just as Lisa's voice came through with urgent news. "David, you need to see these files." Conway's not just running a smuggling operation. He's been gathering blackmail material on restaurant executives across the country. Names, dates, compromising photos, everything he needs to keep expanding his network. David started his car, processing this new information. The scope of Conway's operation was staggering. He hadn't just created a criminal enterprise, he'd built a web of corruption that stretched throughout the entire industry. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message made his blood run cold. "Interesting evening, David. Perhaps it's time we had a proper conversation about the future of Sunrise Burgers." Conway knew they were onto him. The question was, what would he do about it? David sat alone in his hotel room at the Madison, 2 floors below Conway's suite, reviewing the files Tyler had retrieved. The laptop had revealed a system far more sophisticated than they'd imagined. Conway hadn't just created a criminal operation, he'd built an entire shadow industry. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Conway. "The Diamond Room. 30 minutes. Come alone, or I release everything I have on your board members. Interesting what people will do to protect their reputations." Lisa's voice came through his earpiece. "David, you can't go alone. We don't know what he's capable of." "That's exactly why I have to," David replied, studying the hotel's floor plan. The Diamond Room was a private dining area off the main restaurant. If Conway's willing to show his hand this directly, he either has an ace up his sleeve or he's desperate. "At least let us monitor the situation," Tyler insisted from his position in the surveillance van. "We've got eyes on all hotel exits." David adjusted his tie, no longer the scruffy undercover visitor, but every inch the CEO. "Keep your distance. Conway's survived this long by being paranoid. If he spots anyone." The Diamond Room was dimly lit. Crystal chandeliers turned low to create intimate pools of light over each table. Conway sat at the far end, a bottle of wine already breathing beside him. He looked perfectly at ease, as if this were just another business dinner. "David Martinez," Conway smiled, standing to greet him. "Please join me. This is a 1982 Bordeaux. I remember it was your preferred vintage when you opened store by 173. David took the offered seat, noting how Conway had positioned himself to watch both the door and windows. "You seem well informed about my preferences. I make it my business to know everything about my partners, past, present, and future." Conway poured 2 glasses with practiced elegance, even their tendency to play detective when they should be running their companies. "Like you played detective in my stores before selling your consulting services to others." Conway's smile never wavered. You're thinking too small, David. What you discovered in store number 173, what you found in Portland, those are just branches. I cultivated the root of this tree years ago, and it runs deeper than you can imagine. Through every major restaurant chain in the country, David said. We found your client list. Ah, yes, my laptop. Very clever sending Jake. He always was one of my best students, but did you really think I'd leave my actual record somewhere so obvious? Conway took a measured sip of wine. What you found was what I wanted you to find. A warning shot, shall we say. David felt a chill despite the room's warmth. A warning about what? About the true nature of our industry. Conway leaned forward, his voice dropping. Do you know what I discovered during my years at Sunrise Burgers? Every restaurant, chain, every food service company, they all share the same dirty little secret. Their supply chains are perfect vehicles for moving anything. Legal, illegal. It's all just inventory if you label it right. So you decided to exploit that weakness. I decided to profit from reality. Your father understood this, David. Why do you think he agreed to be our first test location? The wine glass froze halfway to David's lips. What did you just say? Conway's smile turned predatory. Store, but 291 wasn't chosen at random. Your father approved our first operation there in '95. He saw the potential, just like I did. Why do you think that locations books were always perfect? He made sure of it. You're lying, David said, but doubt crept into his voice. His father had passed away 5 years ago, leaving him the company and a legacy he'd always strived to honor. Am I? Conway pulled out his phone, sliding it across the table. On the screen was a photo. David's father shaking hands with a younger Conway, standing in front of store number 291's grand opening banner. He was a practical man, understood that sometimes business requires creative solutions. David stared at the photo, his world tilting on its axis. What do you want? The same thing your father wanted. Profitable partnership. You've made quite a mess, David. Phillips and Ray were sloppy, drew too much attention, but we can clean this up, streamline the operation. Your company stays profitable, your reputation intact, and your father's real legacy protected. And if I refuse, Conway's expression hardened, then I release everything. Not just about your father, but about every board member, every executive, every manager who ever looked the other way. Your company won't survive the scandal. Your father's name will be dragged through the mud. And for what? Some misguided notion of corporate ethics? A waiter approached with menus, but Conway waved him away. You have 24 hours to decide. David, choose wisely. Remember, your father did. David stood slowly, his mind racing. You've thought of everything, haven't you? That's why I succeeded where Phillips failed. He saw this as a simple smuggling operation. I built an empire based on human nature itself. Everyone has secrets, everyone can be compromised, and everyone has their price. Conway raised his glass in a mock toast. Even heroes like you. As David walked out of the diamond room, his phone buzzed one final time. A message from Conway. Oh, and David, don't bother checking the hotel security cameras. They've been experiencing technical difficulties all evening, just like they did in '95 when your father and I first met here. The magnitude of what they were facing crashed over David. This wasn't just about cleaning up one corrupt operation. It was about confronting a darkness that had been growing in his company since before he even took control. And his father, the man whose principles he'd tried so hard to live up to, might have been the one who planted the first seed. David sat in his father's old study, now part of his own home office, surrounded by photographs and memories that suddenly felt like strangers. The room remained exactly as his father had left it. Dark oak shelves lined with business books, awards from various industry associations, and family photos spanning decades of Sunrise Burgers history. One photo in particular drew his attention. It showed his father cutting the ribbon at store number 291's opening, his proud smile now seeming to hold hidden meanings. David took the frame off the wall, examining it more closely. Behind his father stood Michael Conway, younger but already carrying that same calculating look in his eyes. "I found something," Lisa's voice came through his speakerphone. She'd been digging through company archives all night. Financial records from '95? There are inconsistencies, just like Conway said, but they were buried under layers of perfect paperwork. "What kind of inconsistencies?" David asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Large cash deposits disguised as supply returns. Inventory adjustments that don't match sales patterns. And here's the interesting part. Your father created a special audit exemption for store D-2291. It was classified as a test location for new management systems." David opened his father's old desk drawer, pulling out a leather-bound journal he'd never had the heart to read after the funeral. "Keep going," he said, beginning to flip through the pages. "The pattern continues for years," Lisa continued, "but it's subtle, professional. Nothing like the crude system Phillips and Ray were running. This was designed by someone who understood corporate finances intimately." "Someone like my father," David said quietly, stopping at an entry dated September 1995. His hands trembled slightly as he read his father's precise handwriting. "Met with Michael today. His proposal is ambitious, perhaps too ambitious, but with the expansion costs mounting and the banks reluctant to extend more credit. Sometimes protecting your legacy means making difficult choices. God forgive me, but I have to think of the bigger picture." Tyler's voice joined the call. "David, we've been analyzing Conway's client list against financial records from other chains. The pattern repeats everywhere he consulted. It's like he created a template based on what he learned at store number 291. "He didn't just learn it," David said, continuing to read through the journal. "He and my father perfected it together. The store was failing in '95. The bank was threatening to foreclose on our expansion loans. Conway offered a solution. But your father built Sunrise Burgers on principles," Marcus protested, "also on the call. Everyone knew that." "Principles don't pay back loans," David quoted from another journal entry. "My father wrote that the night he agreed to Conway's plan. He convinced himself it was temporary, just until the company stabilized." Lisa's typing could be heard through the phone. "The company's financial records show a dramatic turnaround in late '95. By '96, Sunrise Burgers was expanding rapidly." David found a folded letter tucked between the journal's pages, dated just weeks before his father's death. It was addressed to him but never sent. "David, my son, by the time you read this, you'll either know everything or nothing at all. Conway promised me it would stay contained, just one location, just until we were stable. But darkness spreads, son. It infects everything it touches. I thought I could control it, use it without becoming it. I was wrong. The real price isn't in dollars, it's in pieces of your soul. Don't make my mistake. Don't." The letter ended there, unfinished. David's father had died of a heart attack 3 days later, his secrets dying with him. Until now. "What's our next move?" Tyler asked, breaking the heavy silence. "Conway's deadline is in 18 hours. David stood, walking to the window. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the same colors as his company's logo. "Lisa, what do we know about Conway's current operation?" "It's sophisticated. He uses legitimate consulting contracts to identify vulnerable chains, then implements his system through compromised employees. The blackmail material ensures silence. It's virtually untraceable unless you know what to look for. And now he wants to bring us back into the fold," Marcus added. Use Sunrise Burgers like before. David picked up the photo of store number 291's, opening again, studying his father's face. "No," he said firmly, "Conway's wrong about one thing. This isn't about protecting my father's legacy, it's about redeeming it." "What are you thinking?" Lisa asked. "Conway's power comes from shadows, secrets kept, evidence hidden, people silenced. So we're going to shine a light so bright he'll have nowhere to hide." David's voice hardened with determination. "Lisa, get me everything we have on his current clients. Tyler, contact every employee who's ever worked at store number 291. Someone must have noticed something over the years. Marcus, reach out to your counterparts at other chains, carefully." "What about Conway's blackmail threat?" Tyler asked. David looked at his father's unfinished letter again. "He's right about one thing. Everyone has secrets. But I won't. Let him use my father's mistakes to perpetuate this system. Sometimes protecting a legacy means having the courage to face the truth about it." His phone buzzed. Another message from Conway. 16 hours left, David. Remember, some sins are better left buried." David typed back a single response. "You didn't know my father as well as you thought. Meeting tomorrow morning. Your hotel. Be ready to talk about the real legacy of store number 291. As he ended the call with his team, David opened his father's journal to the last entry, dated the day before his death. "The sunrise burns those who look directly at it. But sometimes, son, that's exactly what needs to be done. B. The early morning light cast long shadows across store Drive-Thru 291's empty parking lot as David's team gathered for what could be their final planning session. They had commandeered the manager's office, the same office where decades ago his father and Conway had first set their scheme in motion. 3 hours until the meeting with Conway, Lisa reported, spreading documents across the desk. "Our data dive into his consulting firm turned up something interesting. Look at these incorporation papers." David studied the documents. Conway Consulting LLC had been established in 1995, the same year store number 2291 became their test location. But something caught his eye. A second signature on the founding paperwork. "Richard Chen," David read aloud. "Why does that name sound familiar?" Tyler, who had been analyzing financial records on his laptop, looked up sharply. Richard Chen was the health inspector for this district in the 90s. He signed off on all store number 291's certifications. "More than that," Marcus added, pulling up old personnel files. His son, James Chen, worked as a manager at 3 different restaurant chains after they hired Conway as a consultant. The pieces clicked into place. Conway didn't just build a distribution network, David realized. He created a complete infrastructure. Health inspectors, suppliers, managers, all connected, all compromised. "And all protected by layers of legitimate paperwork," Lisa confirmed. "But we found a weak point. Conway's consulting contracts all include a specific clause about proprietary inventory management systems." "His cover for implementing the smuggling operation," David nodded. "What about it?" "The clause originated here, in the original agreement with store number 291. Your father may have signed off on it, but he also left us a way to fight back. Look at the contract's termination terms." David scanned the legal language, then smiled grimly. "Any systematic violation of corporate ethical guidelines automatically voids all confidentiality provisions. My father built in a kill switch." "But would it hold up?" Marcus asked. "Conway's had decades to cover his tracks." "It doesn't need to hold up in court," David replied. "It just needs to give us leverage. Conway's power comes from controlling information. If we can threaten that control." A knock at the office door interrupted them. Jake entered, looking nervous but determined. "You need to see this," he said, leading them to the store's kitchen. In the walk-in freezer, Jake moved aside several boxes of supplies, revealing a false panel in the wall. Behind it was a small safe, its digital keypad glowing softly in the cold air. "Conway's personal vault," Jake explained. "Every store in his network has one. It's where he keeps physical copies of his most sensitive documents, insurance against digital evidence being destroyed." "Can you open it?" David asked. Jake shook his head. "The combination changes monthly. Only Conway knows it." "Maybe not," Tyler said thoughtfully. "Remember what Jake told us about Conway's laptop password? He uses his daughter's birthday plus store numbers. What if—" David was already pulling out his phone, accessing old company records. "Store number 291 was our first location in Portland. Opened in September 1995. Jake, when is Conway's daughter's birthday?" March 17th, 1990, Jake replied. "He mentioned it once when he was in a rare good mood." Tyler stepped forward, entering numbers into the keypad, 0317795591. The safe clicked open. Inside, they found exactly what Conway had tried to protect. Detailed records of his entire operation, including the original handwritten notes from his meetings with David's father. But something else caught David's attention, a USB drive labeled insurance. "Lisa," David called, plugging the drive into Tyler's laptop. "Are you seeing this?" Files populated the screen, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, bank records. Conway hadn't just been gathering blackmail material, he'd been documenting everything as protection against his own partners. "This is evidence against everyone," Lisa breathed. "Not just the people he blackmailed, but the ones who helped him set up the system. Health inspectors, bank managers, corporate executives." "Including himself," David noted. "He was so paranoid about being betrayed that he created a complete record of his own crimes." Suddenly, Marcus burst into the freezer. "Conway's here," he reported urgently. "He just pulled into the parking lot. He's early." Through the kitchen window, they could see Conway's sleek car parked outside. He wasn't alone. Two large men in dark suits emerged from a second vehicle. "He's not here for the meeting," Tyler realized. "He's here to clean house." David quickly copied the drive's contents to their secure server, while Lisa alerted their backup team. They had prepared for this possibility, but not this soon. "Jake, get to the back exit," David ordered. "Tyler, secure the evidence." "Marcus, Lisa, implement protocol Echo." "What about you?" Lisa asked as they moved to their positions. David straightened his tie, tucking his father's journal into his jacket pocket. "I'm going to have that conversation about legacies after all." As Conway and his men approached the store's entrance, David thought about his father's unfinished letter. The truth about legacies wasn't in what you inherited, but in what you chose to do with that inheritance. Through the glass doors, he could see Conway's confident smile, the smile of a man who thought he held all the cards. But Conway had made one crucial mistake. He had assumed David would be as afraid of the truth as he was. The morning light streamed through store number 291's windows as Conway stepped inside, his two associates flanking him like shadows. David stood calmly behind the counter, deliberately choosing the spot where his father had first shaken hands with Conway 25 years ago. "You're early," David said evenly, noting how Conway's eyes darted around the store, assessing exit points and potential threats. The consultant's usual smooth confidence seemed slightly frayed at the edges. "Change of plans," Conway replied, gesturing for his men to check the back areas. "I thought we might have a more private conversation, away from the hotel's prying eyes." Worried about witnesses, David kept his voice casual, though he was acutely aware of Tyler and the others quietly moving through their practiced positions. "That's not like you, Michael. You usually prefer to have an audience for your negotiations." Conway's smile tightened fractionally. You've been busy since our dinner. My sources tell me your team has been asking interesting questions at other chains, making calls that shouldn't be made. Just doing due diligence. Isn't that what you taught my father? Document everything, maintain plausible deniability. The mention of David's father caused something to flicker in Conway's eyes. Charles was a practical man. He understood that business sometimes requires uncomfortable compromises. Is that what you told him that first night? David pulled out his father's journal. When the bank was threatening to foreclose and you offered him a solution, or did you wait until he was in deep enough that he couldn't back out? Your father came to me, Conway snapped, his composure cracking slightly. The banks were circling, the economy was tanking, and his precious principles weren't going to save 300 employees from unemployment. I gave him a way out. One of Conway's men returned, whispering something in his ear. Conway's expression darkened. The safe, he said flatly. You found it, like you found all the others. One in every compromised location, filled with enough evidence to destroy everyone involved, including yourself. David watched the calculation happening behind Conway's eyes. Insurance, you called it. But insurance works both ways. Conway's laugh held no humor. You think finding some old papers changes anything? I built this system to last, David. It's bigger than your father, bigger than Sunrise Burgers. Do you know how many people depend on it now? How many legitimate businesses would collapse if it all came to light? I know exactly how many, David replied. I have the list. Every health inspector you bribed, every manager you compromised, every executive who looked the other way. Your insurance policy was very thorough. The second man returned, nodding, to Conway. They were alone in the store now, or so Conway thought. David knew his team was watching, waiting, recording everything. So here's my counteroffer, David continued. You walk away, completely. Close your consulting firm, end all current contracts, disappear to whatever island you've been funneling money to for the past 2 decades. Conway's smile returned, confident again. Or what? You'll expose everything? Destroy your own company's reputation, release evidence that your beloved father helped create a criminal enterprise? No, David said quietly. I'll do something much worse. I'll tell the truth. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of papers. These are copies of tomorrow's press release. Sunrise Burgers announcing a complete internal investigation into historical criminal activities. My father's role included. Every detail, every compromise, every mistake, all of it public. Conway's face went pale. You're bluffing. This would destroy everything your father built. My father built a company on trust and integrity, David replied. Then he compromised those principles out of fear. His greatest regret wasn't getting caught. It was teaching men like you that everyone has a price. Think about what you're doing, Conway warned. Your father's legacy is mine to protect or expose. David cut him off. And unlike you, I understand what legacy really means. It's not about preserving a reputation. It's about facing the truth and choosing to do better. He could see Conway processing options, running scenarios. The consultant's power had always come from others' fear of exposure. He'd never encountered someone willing to expose themselves first. The press release goes out in 24 hours, David continued. Unless every store in your network receives. Notice that Conway Consulting is immediately terminating all contracts. Your choice. You'd sacrifice everything to stop me? No, David corrected him. I'd sacrifice a false legacy to preserve a real one. My father made a mistake trusting you. I won't repeat it. Conway's phone buzzed, a message that made him stiffen. My accounts, he said, voice tight with fury. What did you do? Nothing, David smiled, but it seems your insurance policy just got cashed in. Amazing how many of your partners choose to save themselves when they realize you've documented all their crimes. Through the store windows, David could see cars pulling into the parking lot, FBI vehicles, unmarked but unmistakable. Conway saw them too, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. "You're making a mistake." Conway tried one last time. "The system works. It keeps businesses alive, people employed." "No," David said firmly. "It corrupts everything it touches. Just like you corrupted my father's principles. The difference is he realized his mistake too late. I still have time to fix it." As federal agents entered the store, David thought about the Sunrise logo gleaming overhead. His father had chosen it as a symbol of new beginnings. Today, it would finally live up to that promise. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of federal interviews, press inquiries, and emergency board meetings. David stood at his office window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold as his team delivered their latest updates. Conway's arrest triggered a cascade effect, Lisa reported, spreading documents across his desk. 3 restaurant chain CEOs have already resigned. Health inspectors are being investigated in 12 cities. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit says this could be the biggest industry-wide corruption case they've ever seen. Tyler, who had been coordinating with federal investigators, added, "They found offshore accounts in 7 countries. Conway wasn't just planning for retirement. He was building escape routes. Every compromised executive had a dedicated account, complete with false identification documents." "What about our employees?" David asked, turning from the window. The human cost of this exposure weighed heavily on his mind. Marcus pulled up a spreadsheet on his tablet. "We've interviewed everyone who worked at store number 291 over the past 20 years. Most were kept in the dark or intimidated into silence. We've identified 28 employees who were directly coerced by Conway's operation. The FBI wants to interview them all. Make sure they have legal representation," David instructed, "and protection if they need it. Conway may be in custody, but we don't know how far his network reaches." His phone buzzed with a text from Jake, who was helping authorities at store number 291. "Found something else behind the freezer wall. You need to see this." David arrived at the store 30 minutes later. The parking lot was filled with federal vehicles, and agents were methodically documenting every inch of the building. Jake met him at the service entrance, looking shaken. "We thought the safe contained everything," Jake said, leading him to the freezer. "But Conway had a secondary compartment. These were inside." He handed David a stack of photographs. The images made David's hands tremble. They showed his father meeting with Conway at various locations over the years, restaurants, hotels, private homes. But it was the dates that caught his attention. The photos continued well past 1995, past the initial agreement at store number 291. "There's more," Jake said quietly, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. "Your father didn't just help Conway set up the original operation. He helped him expand it to other chains. He was Conway's silent partner for almost a decade." David sank onto a nearby prep table, the weight of this new revelation crushing him. "Does anyone else know about this?" "Just the lead FBI agent. She's giving you 24 hours to review everything before it becomes part of the official investigation." Back in his office, David spread the new evidence across his desk. The ledger contained detailed notes in his father's handwriting, meetings, agreements, profit calculations. The operation hadn't been a desperate measure to save Sunrise Burgers. It had become a calculated business strategy. "What are you going to do?" Lisa asked softly. She had been with the company long enough to remember his father, to understand what this meant. David picked up the press release they had prepared, the one that told a story of a single compromise, a mistake born of desperation. Now he knew that story was a lie. "We tell the truth," he said finally, "all of it, no matter what it costs." "The board won't like it," Tyler warned. "They're already nervous about the initial exposure. This could tank our stock completely." "Then let it tank." David's voice was firm. "We can rebuild the business. We can't rebuild trust with more lies." His phone rang, the board chairman demanding an emergency session. As David prepared to face them, he noticed something tucked into the back of his father's ledger. It was another unfinished letter dated just days before his death. "David, the truth is harder than I thought." Each compromise led to another. Each lie required more lies to protect it. "Conway didn't corrupt me. He simply showed me how easy it was to corrupt myself. The sunrise burns those who look directly at it, but darkness burns deeper. Remember that when the time comes." A news alert flashed across his computer screen. Another CEO had resigned, this one from one of the largest fast food chains in the country. Conway's network was unraveling, taking down powerful figures across the industry. "Sir," his assistant called through the intercom, "the FBI has more questions about store number 291, and reporters are gathering in the lobby." David straightened, his tie gathering the damning evidence about his father. "Lisa, start revising the press release. Tyler, get me everything we have on every chain Conway ever consulted for. Marcus, I want a complete audit of our entire system. Every store, every manager, every transaction." "What's our message?" Lisa asked, poised to take notes. David looked at his father's photo on the wall, then at the Sunrise logo glowing on his computer screen. "The truth isn't just about exposing darkness," he said. "It's about choosing what to build in its place. We're not just going to admit what happened, we're going to show the industry how to make it right." As he headed to the board meeting, David could feel the weight of both his father's sins and his own choices. The easy path would be to bury this deeper evidence, to let the smaller story stand. But real change, he realized, required complete honesty, no matter how painful. The sun had fully set now, darkness gathering outside his windows. But tomorrow would bring another sunrise, and with it, the chance to prove that transparency could be stronger than secrecy, that integrity could rebuild what corruption had destroyed. The Sunrise Burgers boardroom felt smaller than usual, its modern glass walls seeming to press in as 12 pairs of eyes focused on David. He had just finished presenting the new evidence about his father's deeper involvement in Conway's operation. The silence that followed was deafening. Board Chairman William Reynolds, who had served alongside David's father for 15 years, was the first to speak. "This is absolutely out of the question," he declared, pushing away the proposed press release. "We agreed to limited disclosure about store number 291. This," he gestured at the ledger and photographs, "this would destroy everything your father built." "My father helped build a criminal enterprise," David replied steadily. "We can't pick and choose which truths we tell." Regina Torres, head of international operations, leaned forward. "David, be reasonable. The initial revelations have already caused our stock to drop 30%. Full disclosure about Charles's involvement would devastate us. We're talking about potential bankruptcy. Not to mention the legal implications," added James Morrison, their chief legal counsel. "The statute of limitations may have expired on some of this, but civil suits would bury us for years. Every franchise owner, every investor who lost money, they'd all have grounds to sue." David opened his father's ledger to a marked page. "Look at these names, 6 other restaurant chains, all corrupted by the same system. Their boards are probably having the same conversation right now, trying to decide how much truth they can afford to hide." "Exactly," Reynolds exclaimed. "Let them take the fall. Conway's arrest is public. We've admitted to one compromised store. We've shown commitment to reform. That's enough." A knock at the door interrupted them. Lisa entered, her face tense. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." She turned on the boardroom's wall-mounted screen, switching to a national news channel. A reporter stood outside another. Familiar restaurant chain's headquarters, breaking news in the expanding restaurant industry scandal. Fast Track Burger's CEO Jonathan Pierce has just announced a complete internal investigation into their connection with Michael Conway's consulting firm. Pierce pledged full transparency, stating, "The industry can only regain trust through complete honesty." David watched his board members' reactions. Pierce's announcement had changed the game. "If we hide the truth now," he said quietly, "we won't just lose money. We'll lose our chance to lead real change in the industry." Pierce is committing corporate suicide, Morrison argued. His stock is down 60% since the announcement. And his customers are praising his courage on social media, Lisa countered, showing them her tablet. The hashtag #HonestFood is trending. People are organizing support campaigns for companies that come clean. David stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. "When my father started this company, he had a vision of changing the restaurant industry. Somewhere along the way, he lost sight of that vision. Conway offered him an easy solution, and one compromise led to another until he couldn't find his way back." He turned to face the board. "We have the same choice now. We can hide behind legal technicalities and PR strategies, or we can show that profit doesn't have to come at the cost of integrity." "Fine words," Reynolds scoffed, "but they won't protect our employees' jobs when we're forced into bankruptcy." "Actually," Lisa interjected, "we've been running projections. Yes, full disclosure would hit us hard initially. But with our new transparency initiatives and the customer loyalty we've built over years, we could weather the storm. It would be tough, but survivable." Tyler, who had been quietly monitoring the situation from his laptop, spoke up. "We're already seeing support on industry forums. Multiple franchise owners have pledged to stick with us if we take a strong, ethical stance." "And what about the employees?" Regina demanded. "The people whose livelihoods depend on us?" "I've spoken with our major unions," Marcus added, joining the discussion. "They're willing to work with us on temporary cost-cutting measures if we commit to full transparency and reformed practices." David pulled out one final document, his father's last unfinished letter. "My father wrote this the day before he died. He was finally ready to tell the truth, to face the consequences of his choices. We can honor that intention now." The board members exchanged glances. Reynolds shook his head slowly. "You realize this decision requires a board vote. As chairman, I must formally advise against this course of action." "I understand," David replied, "and I should be clear. If the board votes against full disclosure, I'll resign as CEO and release the evidence myself. My father's legacy isn't just this company. It's the choice between truth and deception, between facing our mistakes and hiding them." Morrison, the lawyer, began furiously scribbling notes. "If you do that, we'll sue me. Add me to the civil cases, fine." David's voice was calm but firm. "Some prices are worth paying." Reynolds called for the vote. The tension in the room was palpable as each board member considered their choice. Not just a business decision, but a moral one that would ripple through the entire industry. As hands began to raise, David thought about that first drive-through conversation he'd overheard, the whispered fears that had led him to uncover this whole conspiracy. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest moments of truth. The boardroom vote came down to a razor-thin margin, 7-5 in favor of full disclosure. As the final hand lowered, William Reynolds threw his pen across the table. In frustration, "You've all just signed the company's death warrant," he declared, gathering his papers, "and I won't be here to witness it." He stood, straightening his suit jacket. "Consider this my resignation as chairman, effective immediately." Before David could respond, Reynolds stormed out of the boardroom. Two other board members, both longtime friends of his father, followed suit. leaving their resignation letters behind. "That could have gone better," Lisa observed dryly, already typing on her tablet. "But we still have quorum. The vote stands." David turned to Morrison, their legal counsel. "How quickly can we prepare the full disclosure statement?" 24 hours, Morrison replied, though his expression suggested he was already calculating potential lawsuits. "But there's something else you need to consider. Reynolds wasn't just your father's friend. He was on the board during Conway's original involvement. His resignation right now could mean he has something to hide," David finished. "Tyler, track Reynolds's connection to store number 291. Check if Conway's records mention him anywhere." Tyler was already pulling up files on his laptop. "On it, but there's more immediate trouble. Social media's exploding with rumors about emergency board meetings at multiple restaurant chains. Someone's leaking details." Marcus burst into the room, his phone in hand. "You need to see this. Conway's wife just gave an interview to Channel 7 News. She's claiming she has evidence that implicates executives across the industry, including some who aren't in Conway's records." They watched the footage on the boardroom screen. Eleanor Conway, elegant and composed, sat in what appeared to be her living room. "My husband didn't create this system," she was saying. "He merely perfected what already existed. I have documentation going back 30 years, showing how the biggest names in the restaurant industry built their empires on similar schemes." David felt a chill. She's trying to spread the damage, make it seem like industry-standard practice, rather than criminal enterprise. "It's working," Tyler reported, scanning news feeds. "Restaurant stocks are plummeting across the board. The market doesn't know who to trust." "Sir," David's assistant called through the intercom. "Jake's on the line from store 291. Says it's urgent." David put the call on speaker. Jake's voice was tense. "Someone broke into the store last night, the safe behind the freezer. They tried to access it. Security footage shows 3 men. Very professional. They failed to crack it, but what? They left a message spray-painted on the office wall. Some secrets stay buried. It matches Reynolds's handwriting." David shared a look with his team. "He's trying to destroy evidence before we can release it. Tyler, get everything we copied. From that safe to the FBI immediately. Lisa, accelerate the disclosure timeline if we wait 24 hours. "David," Regina interrupted, pointing to the screen. Eleanor Conway was still speaking, but now she held up a familiar-looking leather book. "Isn't that—" "My father's original journal," David breathed. The one they'd found had been a later volume. "Where did she get that?" "Charles Martinez wasn't just my husband's business partner," Eleanor was saying. "He was his mentor in many ways. The system you're all investigating, Charles perfected it in the 1980s, long before Michael adapted it for modern use." The boardroom erupted in chaos as phones began ringing simultaneously. News alerts flooded their screens. The story was exploding across all platforms. "David," Lisa said urgently, "if what she's saying is true—" "It changes everything," David acknowledged grimly. "The whole narrative shifts. We're not just dealing with Conway's corruption anymore. We're looking at decades of systematic industry-wide fraud, with my father at the center." Marcus, who had been quietly making calls, looked up from his phone. "Just heard from my contact at Fast Track Burgers. Jonathan Pierce's announcement of full transparency. He's been found dead in his office. Early reports saying possible suicide. But Conway has a history of making problems disappear," Tyler finished. "And his wife just raised the stakes significantly." David walked to the window, watching the sun sink behind the city skyline. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "The sunrise burns those who look directly at it." Now he understood. It wasn't just about facing the truth, but about surviving the exposure. "Change of plans," he announced, turning back to his team. "We're not just releasing a disclosure statement. We're going to tell the whole story from the beginning. Every detail, every connection, every name, including my father's role as the original architect. That's corporate suicide, Morrison protested. No, David corrected him. It's the only way to survive. Eleanor Conway just turned this into a war for industry control. If we try to manage the narrative now, we'll look like we're hiding something. But if we expose everything ourselves... We control how the truth comes out, Lisa realized. Exactly. Tyler, get me everything you can find on my father's activities in the 1980s. Lisa, start preparing a comprehensive timeline. Marcus, reach out to every store manager. I want to know about any suspicious activity, no matter how small or how long ago. And Reynolds, Morrison asked, alert the FBI about the break-in attempt, but don't stop him from running. The farther he runs, the more guilty he looks, and the more credible our disclosure becomes. As his team sprang into action, David picked up his father's later journal, the one that ended with regret and unfinished confessions. Time to finish your story, Dad, he murmured, all of it. David sat in his childhood home's attic, surrounded by dusty boxes and old memories. After Eleanor Conway's bombshell revelation about his father's role in the 1980s, he knew the answers he needed might be hidden here, in the place where Charles Martinez had kept his most personal records. Found something? Lisa called from behind a stack of old tax records. She emerged holding a metal lockbox, its surface covered in decades of dust. The key was taped under your father's old desk, just where Jake said it would be. Jake had remembered Charles keeping a special box of documents, something he'd check periodically when he thought no one was watching. The former night manager's memory was proving invaluable as they pieced together the past. The lock clicked open, revealing a treasure trove of documents, photos, letters, and most importantly, a stack of small notebooks dating back to 1982. David's hands trembled as he opened the earliest volume. This goes back to when Dad was just a shift manager at Burger Haven, he said, scanning the cramped handwriting, before he even thought of starting Sunrise Burgers. Tyler, who was documenting everything with his camera, leaned in. What does it say? It's a record of systematic health code violations, not just at his location, but throughout the Burger Haven chain. The company was cutting corners everywhere, endangering customers to save money. David turned the page. Dad was gathering evidence, building a case against them. A whistleblower? Lisa asked. Not exactly. David continued reading. He tried to report it through proper channels, but Burger Haven's management buried the complaints. That's when he started thinking bigger. Listen to this entry. They think following rules makes them righteous, but their rules protect the corrupt and punish the honest. Maybe it's time for new rules. RM says he knows people who can help set up alternative supply chains. Health inspectors who understand business realities. Could be the answer I've been looking for. RM. Tyler quickly searched their database. Robert Morrison, James Morrison's father. He was a regional manager at Burger Haven back then. And now his son is our legal counsel, Lisa noted. That can't be coincidence. David found a series of photographs paperclipped to the next pages. They showed young versions of his father meeting with various men in restaurants and parking lots. On the back of each photo was a name and date. These men, David said slowly, they all went on to found major restaurant chains. Dad wasn't just learning the industry's dark side. He was building relationships with others who wanted to exploit it. His phone buzzed. Marcus calling from headquarters. David, we've got problems. James Morrison just accessed highly sensitive files and then left the building. Security saw him making copies first. Like father, like son, David muttered. He must have realized we were close to exposing his family's connection. Tyler, lock down Morrison's access to all systems. Lisa, alert the FBI that he might be destroying evidence. But there was more in the lockbox. David found a letter from 1984, written by his father but never sent, to the Health Department Inspector General. I am writing to report systemic corruption within the restaurant industry's oversight system. What began as individual violations has become an organized network of fraud and health code evasion. I have documented evidence of inspectors accepting bribes to overlook violations, managers coordinating to hide unsafe practices, supply chain manipulation to bypass safety regulations, financial fraud to cover illegal operations. The enclosed documents prove. The letter ended there, unsent and incomplete. But attached to it was a newspaper clipping from a week later. Health Department Inspector General dies in car accident. It wasn't just about profit, David realized. Dad uncovered something bigger, something that reached into government agencies, but instead of exposing it, he decided to use it, Lisa finished, build his own business using the corrupt system he'd discovered. Tyler's laptop chimed with an alert. David, you need to see this. I've been running facial recognition on those old photos. One of the men meeting with your father. He's currently the head of the restaurant industry. Regulatory Commission. The government agency responsible for oversight and reform, David said. The same agency that's supposedly investigating the Conway scandal now. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about one consultant's criminal enterprise or even industry-wide corruption. It was about a system deliberately designed to appear legitimate while facilitating fraud at every level. His phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Your father knew when to stop digging. Be smarter than him, RM. They're trying to scare us off, Lisa observed. David picked up another photo from the box. It showed his father at the grand opening of the first Sunrise Burgers, smiling proudly beside his young son. The inscription on the back read, "A new dawn for the industry." God forgive me. No, David said firmly. They're reminding us why we need to dig deeper. Dad started gathering evidence because he wanted to expose corruption. Somewhere along the way, he chose to profit from it instead. We have a chance to finish what he originally intended. It'll be dangerous, Tyler warned. These people have been protecting this system for decades. David looked at his father's earliest journal entries, remembering the idealistic young manager who wanted to fight corruption before becoming part of it. Get everyone back to headquarters, he ordered. We're not just releasing a disclosure about Conway's operation anymore. We're going to expose 40 years of industry-wide corruption, government complicity, and every person who helped build this system. Including your father? Lisa asked softly. Especially my father. The truth doesn't get to have exceptions. David closed the lockbox, his decision made. It's time to finish the letter he never sent. The Sunrise Burgers headquarters buzzed with tense energy as David's team worked to compile 40 years of evidence. They'd converted the main conference room into a command center, walls covered with timelines, photographs, and connection maps linking decades of corruption. Another CEO just resigned, Marcus announced, adding a red mark to their industry map. Fast Fry International. Their board claims it's for personal reasons, but our sources say they found unauthorized payments linked to Morrison's father. Lisa, who'd been cross-referencing financial records, looked up from her computer. Speaking of Morrison, his travel records show he flew to meet Eleanor Conway yesterday, 2 hours after he copied those files. They're consolidating, David observed, studying the pattern of resignations and hasty corporate meetings across the industry. Everyone connected to the old system is either running or choosing sides. Tyler burst into the room, his laptop open. We've got movement at the Regulatory Commission. They just announced an emergency review of restaurant industry oversight procedures. They're trying to get ahead of our disclosure. Commissioner Roberts making his move, David nodded, remembering the photo of the younger Roberts meeting with his father decades ago. He knows. We have evidence linking him to the original corruption. This is his attempt to control the narrative. The room's atmosphere shifted as Jake entered, looking worried. David, there's something you need to know. I've been getting calls from other night managers, the ones who worked under Conway's system. 3 of them have had break-ins at their homes. Nothing taken, just searched. They're looking for more evidence, Lisa realized. Conway must have distributed backup records to multiple locations. David's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Final warning. Some sunrises are better left to darkness. Don't make your father's mistake. Before he could respond, the building's power cut out. Emergency lights kicked in as security. Alarms began blaring. Cyber attack, Tyler reported, fingers flying over his keyboard. They're trying to breach our servers, but they don't know about our off-site backups. This isn't just about stopping the disclosure, David said, watching. Multiple systems go dark. They're sending a message, showing how much power they still have. Lisa's phone buzzed with news alerts. David, turn on the TV. Eleanor Conway's making another statement. The emergency channel's screen showed Eleanor Conway standing at a podium, her composed demeanor a sharp contrast to the chaos she was creating. Recent allegations about industry-wide corruption are greatly exaggerated, she was saying. What we're seeing is a coordinated attack on American business by individuals with personal vendettas, including David Martinez, whose own father's questionable practices are well documented. She's trying to discredit us before we can release the evidence, Marcus observed. Not just discredit, David corrected. She's drawing battle lines. Listen, Eleanor continued. The Restaurant Industry Regulatory Commission has always maintained strict oversight. Commissioner Roberts has been a tireless advocate for food safety and business integrity. Any suggestion otherwise is simply an attempt to destabilize a vital American industry. As if on cue, David's secure line rang, Commissioner Roberts himself. David put it on speaker. Mr. Martinez. Roberts's voice was smooth, professional. I'm calling to offer you a way out of this unfortunate situation. Your father understood the importance of industry stability. He made the right choice when faced with similar revelations. You mean when he chose to join your corruption instead of exposing it? He chose to be practical, to protect jobs, maintain order. What you're planning, it won't just damage a few corrupt individuals. It will devastate hundreds of thousands of workers, destroy pensions, collapse local economies. David looked at the timeline on the wall, tracking 40 years of systematic fraud. You're not worried about workers, you're worried about exposure. I'm worried about unnecessary chaos. We can work something out. Your father's reputation can remain intact. Sunrise Burgers can thrive. All you have to do is be reasonable. Like you were reasonable with the Health Department Inspector General in 1984? A long pause. Accidents happen, Mr. Martinez, especially to people who don't understand the bigger picture. Well, the threat was clear. David met his team's concerned gazes, then spoke firmly. Here's my counteroffer. In 1 hour, we're releasing everything. Every document, every connection, every crime, going back to 1982, including your role in creating this system. You'll destroy yourself. Maybe, but I'll take you all down with me. David's voice hardened. My father chose wrong. I'm choosing to finish what he started before you corrupted him. As Roberts began to respond, David cut the connection. Tyler, how long until our systems are back? 20 minutes to full restoration. They're good, but our security's better. Lisa, start the countdown clock. In 1 hour, everything goes. Public, media outlets, social platforms, government oversight committees, multiple channels so they can't stop it all. What about the workers? Marcus asked. Roberts wasn't entirely wrong about the economic impact. David picked up his father's original unsent letter exposing the corruption. We include a complete plan for industry reform, protection for workers, Transparent oversight, real consequences for violations. Show people we're not just exposing problems, we're offering solutions. They'll still come after us, Jake warned. These people have spent decades building their power. Yes, David agreed, but they built it on shadows and secrets. Let's see how they handle the light. 45 minutes until disclosure. The Sunrise Burgers headquarters had become a fortress, with private security teams guarding every entrance. David watched from his office window as another news van joined the growing media circus outside. 3 more attempts to breach our servers, Tyler reported, monitoring multiple screens. They're getting desperate. Last one tried to access our backup sites directly. Lisa rushed in, her tablet displaying multiple urgent alerts. We've got movement across the industry. Emergency. Board meetings at 6 major chains. The Restaurant Industry Regulatory Commission just called a midnight session. And, she paused, Eleanor Conway is requesting a private meeting. Says she has information about your father you need to hear before we release anything. Divide and delay, David said, recognizing the tactics. They're trying to run out the clock. Hoping we'll hesitate. Marcus entered with more updates. Our store managers are reporting unusual health inspections at multiple locations. Inspectors showing up unannounced, citing violations that don't exist. They're trying to create regulatory pressure. The phone lines lit up again. Commissioner Roberts's office. David ignored it, focusing instead on the final preparation of their disclosure package. They had organized the evidence into 3 parts: historical documentation, current operations, and proposed reforms. David, Jake called from his position monitoring store communications, you need to see this. Live feed from store 0291. The security camera showed 3 official-looking vehicles pulling into the parking lot. Men in suits emerged, flashing badges at the startled staff. Federal agents? Lisa asked. Look closer, Tyler said, enhancing the image. Those badges aren't FBI. They're from a department that doesn't exist. These are Conway's people using fake credentials. David reached for his phone, but before he could call the real FBI, the power went out again, this time in the entire block surrounding headquarters. They're escalating, David observed, as emergency generators hummed to life. Tyler? Backup systems holding, 38 minutes until disclosure. But Tyler's expression was grim. They're not just attacking our systems now. They're going after personal targets. On multiple screens, they watched as their team members' personal accounts began flooding with suspicious activity. Bank accounts showing unauthorized transfers, credit cards being declined, social media accounts spewing automated posts with damaging allegations. Character assassination, Lisa explained. They're trying to discredit everyone involved in the disclosure before it happens. David's personal phone buzzed with a text, this one from Eleanor Conway herself. Last chance, David. Your father left you more than just a company. He left you secrets that could hurt people beyond business. People you care about. Think carefully about what you're risking. Adi, as if to emphasize her point, another alert popped up. Someone was attempting to access his father's sealed personal records at multiple government agencies simultaneously. Sir, his assistant called through the intercom, there's a woman in the lobby claiming to be your mother's old nurse from Sacred Heart Hospital. Says she has urgent information about the night your father died. The implications made David's blood run cold. They weren't just threatening the future anymore. They were prepared to rewrite the past. 25 minutes, Tyler announced, still fighting digital fires across their systems. Lisa looked up from her tablet. Media's getting tipped about personal scandals involving everyone on our team. They're trying to turn this into a circus, make anything we release look like revenge from disgruntled employees. Let them, David said firmly. Every attack just proves how desperate they are to keep this hidden. Tyler, start the secondary. Protocol. Tyler nodded, initiating a program they'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Across the country, hundreds of pre-positioned data packages began moving through secure channels. Even if headquarters was completely compromised, the truth would still get out. 15 minutes, Marcus reported. Store number 291 is being seized by those fake federal agents. They're looking for the safe. Let them look, David said. The real evidence isn't there anymore. Jake, initiate Protocol Sunrise at all locations. Jake began sending coded messages to every store manager they trusted. Within minutes, Sunrise, Burger's restaurants across the country began their own carefully planned sequences, downloading secure files, preparing statements, positioning themselves for what was coming. 10 minutes, Lisa announced. Commissioner Roberts is making an emergency public statement. On the news feeds, Roberts stood at his office podium, looking grave. We have uncovered evidence of a coordinated attempt to destabilize the American restaurant industry through false allegations and manufactured evidence. As of midnight tonight, the Commission is freezing all corporate accounts related to these allegations, pending full investigation. Too late, David said quietly, watching the final countdown. The truth doesn't need corporate accounts to spread. 5 minutes, Tyler reported. Our systems are holding, backup sites are ready, social media channels primed, news outlets standing by. David picked up his father's original journal, the one that documented his first discovery of industry-wide corruption. Time to finish what you started, Dad. The right way this time. 1 minute, Lisa announced as every screen in the room displayed the countdown. No turning back now. David looked at his team, tired, targeted, but determined. Send it, all. Every document, every photo, every connection. Let them try to bury this. The countdown reached 0. Tyler pressed the final key sequence. It's done. Everything's releasing simultaneously across all platforms. David watched as 40 years of carefully hidden corruption began pouring into the light. On the news feeds, anchors were already breaking from scheduled programming to report breaking news about widespread industry corruption. His phone buzzed one final time. Another unknown number. You just started a war. David typed back 2 words. No. Finished. The first hour after the disclosure felt like watching a tidal wave build offshore. David and his team monitored screens from their command center as the information spread across every platform, gaining momentum with each passing minute. Major networks are picking up the story, Lisa reported, tracking media coverage. They're focusing on the government connection, Commissioner Roberts' role in suppressing health violations. CNN is running your father's original evidence about Burger Haven from the 80s. Tyler's array of monitors showed social media exploding with reactions. The documents are being downloaded and shared faster than they can try to take them down. People are already organizing boycotts of implicated chains. Homeland Security just arrived at the Restaurant Industry Regulatory Commission, Marcus announced, watching live feeds. Roberts is being escorted from the building. His staff is shredding documents, but we already have copies of everything. David's attention was drawn to the security feeds from store number 291. The fake federal agents had abandoned their search, leaving in a hurry as real FBI teams arrived. The safe behind the freezer would give them nothing. Its contents were already part of the disclosure. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the release. Restaurant chain CEOs, board members, industry leaders, all trying to reach him. But one message stood out from Eleanor Conway. You have no idea what you've started. Some fires burn everything they touch. As if on cue, Lisa's tablet lit up with breaking news. They're fighting back. 3 major chains just filed lawsuits against Sunrise Burgers, claiming corporate espionage and defamation. Their PR teams are calling this a coordinated attack on legitimate businesses by disgruntled competitors. "Look at this," Tyler called, highlighting a pattern in the data. "Systematic account freezes across the industry. Someone's trying to lock down financial evidence, but they're too late. The money trails are already public." Jake burst into the room, his face pale. "David, there's something wrong at the stores. Health inspectors are showing up everywhere, accompanied by police. They're trying to shut us down, claiming imminent public health risks." Roberts's last move, David realized, using his remaining authority to punish us. How many locations? All of them. Every Sunrise Burgers in the country is being hit simultaneously. David stood, decision made. "Lisa, implement emergency protocol Delta. Every store switches to live stream immediately. I want cameras broadcasting every inspection, every interaction. Let the public see how they operate." Within minutes, hundreds of Sunrise Burgers locations began streaming live footage. Customers pulled out phones, recording health inspectors, who seemed more interested in shutting down operations than actual health concerns. "It's working," Marcus reported, monitoring public reaction. "Social media's flooded with support. People are showing up at our locations, protesting the inspections. Some are even ordering food in solidarity." Tyler's security alert system suddenly flashed red. "New attack pattern. They're targeting our suppliers, trying to disrupt the supply chain. Delivery trucks are being delayed, orders cancelled. They want to force us to close through attrition," Lisa observed. "If we can't get supplies, we adapt," David cut in. "Implement the contingency plan. Contact our backup suppliers, the ones we vetted during the investigation. It's time to show the industry what a truly clean supply chain looks like." His phone rang, a secure line from the FBI task force. "Mr. Martinez, we're moving on multiple locations simultaneously. Conway's network is unraveling. We need you to authorize access to your father's private records." "Send your teams to headquarters," David replied. "Everything we have is yours." He paused. "What about Roberts?" "Gone. Private jet took off 20 minutes ago, but we have teams waiting at his destination." Another alert from Tyler. "David, you need to see this. Someone just leaked Eleanor Conway's private emails. These aren't from us." The emails revealed something unexpected: internal conflict within the corrupt network. Eleanor had been planning to betray her husband's partners, securing immunity for herself by exposing everyone else. The system's eating itself, Lisa realized. Everyone's trying to save themselves by exposing others. David watched as decades of carefully maintained corruption collapsed into chaos. Restaurant chains were announcing emergency board meetings, suppliers were publicly severing old relationships, and government officials were scrambling to distance themselves from Roberts. "Sir," his assistant called through the intercom, "there's a situation in the lobby. Former employees from other chains, hundreds of them. They want to share their stories." "Let them in," David ordered. "Set up recording stations. Every story matters now." His phone buzzed with another message from Eleanor Conway, but this one was different. "You were right. Michael always said your father lost his nerve, but Charles Martinez didn't stop because he was weak. He stopped because he saw what the system really was, a cancer that had to be cut out completely. Finish it." Lisa looked up from her tablet, her eyes wide. "David, you need to see these numbers. Our stock is falling, but customer support is soaring. People are choosing transparency over profits." "Because they finally can," David replied, watching as more whistleblowers arrived in the lobby. "The truth doesn't just expose corruption, it gives people the courage to stand against it." Outside headquarters, the media circus had become a gathering of supporters. Employees from across the industry, customers, food safety advocates, all demanding real change. David picked up his father's journal one last time, then headed for the lobby. It was time to hear every story, face every consequence, and rebuild something better from the ashes of a corrupt system. The sunrise logo glowed steadily above the entrance, its promise of a new day finally ringing true. As dawn broke over the city, David found himself back at store number 291, standing in the same drive-through lane where this journey had begun. The restaurant was quiet now, closed like all their locations while the health inspection chaos sorted itself out. But this morning felt different, heavy with both ending and beginning. They found Roberts, Lisa reported, joining him in the empty parking lot. Private jet was forced to land in Toronto. FBI has him in custody, along with 3 board members from other chains who tried to flee with him. David nodded, his attention drawn to an elderly woman approaching the store, her steps slow but determined. He recognized her immediately. Margaret Chen, Richard Chen's widow. The former health inspector had been one of the original architects of the corruption, according to his father's journals. "Mrs. Chen," David greeted her quietly, "we weren't expecting you." "No, I suppose not." She clutched a worn leather briefcase. "But there are things you need to know about your father, about Richard, about how this all really started." Inside the empty restaurant, Margaret opened the briefcase, revealing stacks of meticulously maintained records. "Richard didn't just help create this system," she explained. "He documented everything, protecting himself the same way Conway did. But there was one thing he never told anyone except me." She pulled out a yellowed envelope. "Your father didn't discover the corruption at Burger Haven by accident. Richard recruited him, tested him, guided him towards specific evidence. They needed someone with integrity, someone the industry would trust, to build the legitimate front for their operation." David's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside were surveillance photos of his father from 1982, long before Store the 291 existed. Notes detailed how they had selected Charles Martinez, studying his habits, his principles, his weaknesses. "They broke him deliberately," Margaret continued, her voice heavy with old guilt. "Created problems at Burger Haven, made him feel powerless to fix things properly, then offered him a solution that would slowly corrupt him. Richard called it ethical erosion, making good people compromise bit by bit until they couldn't find their way back." Tyler, who had been monitoring communications nearby, looked up from his laptop. "David, you need to see this. Conway just released a statement from prison." On Tyler's screen, Michael Conway sat in prison orange, looking directly at the camera. "The truth about Charles Martinez isn't that he created our system. The truth is that he was our greatest success story. We didn't just corrupt him, we made him believe corrupting others was his own idea." Lisa's tablet chimed with breaking news. Eleanor Conway was just found dead in her home. Initial reports suggesting suicide, but... She trailed off as more details came in. She left a recorded confession, names, dates, methods, everything, about how they targeted and compromised people over 4 decades. Margaret Chen pulled out more documents. "Your father realized the truth near the end. That's why they..." She stopped, emotions overwhelming her. "Richard confessed everything to me before he died. The heart attack that killed your father wasn't natural. They couldn't risk him exposing how deep the manipulation went." David's world tilted on its axis. He'd known his father was involved in the corruption, had chosen to participate in it, but learning he had been deliberately targeted, manipulated, and ultimately murdered by the very system he thought he helped create, it changed everything. "There's more," Margaret said softly, "about your mother's illness, the experimental treatments that seemed to come just in time. They manufactured that crisis too, used it to ensure your father's complete compliance." The revelation hit David like a physical blow. His mother's miraculous recovery had been part of their scheme, another way to bind his father to their system through gratitude and obligation. His phone buzzed with updates from Marcus. More arrests across the industry, executives turning on each other, evidence flooding in from whistleblowers. The system wasn't just collapsing, it was imploding spectacularly. "Why tell me this now?" David asked Margaret. "Because you deserve to know your father wasn't just another corrupt businessman. He was their proof that anyone could be turned, that integrity itself could be weaponized." She pulled out one final document, a surveillance photo of David himself, dated 20 years ago. "And because they had the same plans for you," Tyler's security alert suddenly flared. "Multiple breaches detected at our backup servers. Someone's trying to bury everything, not just about the corruption, but about how they selected and compromised their targets." "Of course they are," Margaret said grimly. "The corruption was just a symptom. The real system was about finding good people and methodically destroying their principles. Your father was their masterpiece. Until you proved stronger than they expected." David looked around store number 291, seeing it with new eyes. Not just the birthplace of a criminal enterprise, but the result of a calculated plan to break a good man's spirit. "What do you want to do?" Lisa asked quietly. "This changes the whole narrative." David picked up the surveillance photo of his younger self, remembering how proud he'd been to work alongside his father. "We tell the whole truth. Not just about the corruption, but about how they identified, targeted, and destroyed good people. Show everyone it wasn't just about money, it was about breaking anyone who might expose them." His phone buzzed with another message from the FBI task force. They'd found Conway's complete files on potential targets, current executives, promising managers, even idealistic young employees, all studied, assessed, and marked for ethical erosion. "Your father would be proud," Margaret said softly. "He tried to warn you at the end. Those last entries in his journal weren't confessions," David finished. "They were attempts to expose the real conspiracy. He died trying to protect me from the same manipulation that destroyed him." Dawn's light streamed through the restaurant windows, catching the Sunrise logo. David thought about all the lives ruined by this system, all the good people broken by calculated corruption. "Time to end it," he said firmly. "Not just the criminal enterprise, but the machine that created it. Show everyone how they turned integrity into a weakness to exploit. The truth would cost him, his father's reputation, his own innocence about the past, perhaps even his company. But as Margaret Chen's evidence proved, some prices were worth paying to expose not just what happened, but why." The Sunrise Burgers corporate boardroom had been transformed into an evidence center, walls covered with surveillance photos of targets spanning 4 decades. David stood before the timeline, connecting faces to the systematic destruction of their principles. "We've identified 87 confirmed targets," Lisa reported, adding another photo to the wall. "All followed the same pattern: find someone with strong ethics, create a crisis they can't solve legally, then offer them a compromise that seems reasonable at first." Tyler looked up from his analysis of the recovered data. The psychological profiling was incredibly sophisticated. They didn't just look for successful people, they specifically sought out those with the strongest moral compasses. The ones most likely to expose corruption if they discovered it naturally. Because corrupting them provided the best protection, David concluded. "Who would suspect the whistleblower of being part of the scheme?" Marcus burst in, his face tense. "We've got trouble. Someone's releasing edited versions of the evidence, trying to make it look like these people were willing participants all along. They're rewriting the narrative." David's phone buzzed with a news alert. On screen, a panel of experts was already debating the new revelations about industry corruption. "This changes everything," one commentator was saying. "These weren't victims of corruption. They were opportunists who helped build the system, including Charles Martinez." "They're trying to bury the manipulation angle," Lisa realized. Make it look like simple greed rather than systematic targeting. Jake entered with more urgent news. David, we're getting reports from other chains. Similar evidence about targeted corruption is being found at their headquarters, but it's disappearing as fast as it's discovered. Someone's conducting a coordinated cleanup. David studied the wall of faces. Good people who'd been deliberately broken. They're protecting the method, not just the results. Tyler, what about Conway's prison communications? Heavily encrypted, but we cracked some of it. He's been sending messages to someone he calls the architect. Seems to be the person who designed the original targeting system. A familiar voice spoke from the doorway. That would be me. They turned to find William Reynolds, their former board chairman, standing there, but he wasn't alone. FBI agents flanked him, and he wore handcuffs. I came to make a deal, Reynolds said, his usual confidence replaced by resignation. Because you're about to face something much worse than Conway's network. David gestured for him to continue. Reynolds sank into a chair, looking suddenly old. I designed the targeting system in 1978, he admitted. Not for the restaurant industry, for a government program studying how to identify and neutralize potential whistleblowers in sensitive industries. When funding was cut, certain private interests saw the potential. You sold it to them, David said. I licensed it. The restaurant industry was just the test case. The real money came from applying it to other sectors, banking, pharmaceuticals, defense contractors, anywhere that needed to ensure employee compliance. Lisa's tablet lit up with alerts. Multiple whistleblowers coming forward across different industries, all describing the same manipulation pattern. Because it works, Reynolds said grimly. Find the most ethical people, break them systematically, use them to protect corruption. Your father wasn't just another target, David. He was proof the system could break anyone. David's phone rang, the FBI task force commander. Martinez, we've got a problem. Similar evidence is surfacing in major corporations worldwide. Same targeting method, same manipulation patterns. This goes way beyond restaurants. Reynolds nodded. Why do you think they're fighting so hard to discredit the psychological manipulation angle? Once people understand how the system identifies and breaks ethical individuals, no industry is safe. The whole machine of corporate corruption could collapse. That's why you came forward, David realized. You know they're going to try to eliminate everyone who understands the targeting system. Eleanor Conway didn't commit suicide, Reynolds confirmed. She was killed because she was going to expose the methodology, not just the results. I'm next on their list, unless I help bury the truth about how we broke good people. Tyler's security alerts blared. Multiple attacks detected. They're hitting every server containing targeting documentation, and he paused, face paling. They're accessing personnel files at major corporations worldwide. Looking for new targets, Reynolds explained. People like you who might expose the system. The corruption in the restaurant industry was just one small part. The real power is in the targeting methodology itself. David's mind raced. They weren't just fighting local corruption anymore. They were up against a global system designed to identify and destroy anyone who might challenge corporate crime. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Your father was our greatest success. You could be our greatest ally. Some systems can't be broken. They can only be joined. David looked at the wall of faces, at all the lives systematically destroyed. Then at his team, waiting for his decision. Tyler, activate Protocol Omega, he ordered. Release everything about the targeting system, methodology, psychological profiles, selection criteria. Show the world not just what they did, but how. They chose their victims. That's suicide, Reynolds warned. Every major corporation will come after you. No, David corrected. They'll be too busy dealing with employees who finally understand how they've been manipulated. Sometimes the best way to break a system is to expose its methods, not just its results. As Tyler began the upload sequence, David picked up a photo of his father, not from the surveillance files, but from his first day as a Burger Haven manager before they targeted him. The integrity in his eyes was clear, unbroken. "We're not just exposing corruption anymore," David told his team. "We're showing the world how to recognize when they're being targeted by it. Time to break the machine that breaks good people." The world erupted in chaos within hours of the targeting system's exposure. David watched from the emergency command center they'd established in a secure location as decades of calculated manipulation came to light across every major industry. "Banking sector is in freefall," Lisa reported, monitoring financial markets. "Worldwide, 3 major CEOs have resigned in the last hour alone. Whistleblowers are coming forward with evidence of targeted manipulation dating back 30 years. Tyler's array of screens showed similar patterns unfolding globally. Pharmaceutical companies, defense contractors, technology firms, they're all experiencing mass walkouts. Employees are recognizing how they were profiled and manipulated. "Look at this," Marcus called, highlighting a particular news feed. A group of former executives from various industries had gathered for an impromptu press conference. "We were chosen because we asked questions," one woman explained, her voice trembling. "They created problems in our departments, made us feel helpless to solve them legally, then offered solutions that seemed reasonable at first. Each compromise led to another until we couldn't recognize ourselves anymore." Reynolds, still under FBI protection, watched the footage with a mixture of pride and shame. The targeting system was perfect because it used people's virtues against them. The stronger their ethical foundation, the more effective their corruption became in protecting the system. David's secure phone rang. The FBI task force commander. "Martinez, we've got a situation. Major corporations are implementing emergency protocols, trying to lock down their personnel files. But it's causing more panic. Employees recognize it as part of the control pattern now. Because they can see the manipulation playbook," David noted. "Every defensive move these companies make just confirms what we exposed." Jake burst in with urgent news from their store networks. "David, something's happening at the restaurants. People are gathering, not just customers, but employees from other chains. They're sharing stories, recognizing patterns. It's turning into a movement." On the screens, they watched as impromptu meetings formed in parking lots across the country. Fast food workers, bank tellers, pharmaceutical reps, tech employees, all comparing notes on how they'd been profiled and pressured over the years. "Sir," his assistant called through the secure line, "you need to see this. The pattern recognition is spreading to social media. People are creating databases, tracking how the targeting system identified potential whistleblowers." Lisa pulled up trending topics on her tablet. "They're calling it the Integrity Index, turning the targeting system's own methodology against corrupt corporations. Employees are using it to identify who might have been marked for manipulation. That's why they're panicking," Reynolds realized. The system worked because people didn't understand how they were being selected and broken. Now they're not just recognizing it, they're actively looking for it. Tyler's security alerts suddenly spiked. "Massive coordinated attack detected. They're trying to discredit the targeting evidence by flooding the internet with fake versions." "Too late," David said, watching the screens. "Look at how people are responding." Social media was filled with personal stories, each one following the same pattern they discovered in his father's case. The very consistency of the manipulation method made it impossible to discredit. His phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted source. "You've started something that can't be controlled. Every person who recognizes their own targeting becomes a new point of exposure. That's what they're afraid of, David told his team. Not just the exposure of corruption, but the exposure of how they identify and break potential whistleblowers. It's going viral in a way they can't contain. Reynolds nodded grimly. The targeting system worked because it was invisible. Once people understand how it identifies ethical individuals for manipulation, they can resist it, Lisa finished. Look at these employee forums. They're already developing warning systems, support networks for people who match the targeting profile. Marcus pulled up more news feeds. Corporate PR teams are in chaos. Every statement they make gets analyzed for manipulation tactics. The playbook we exposed is being used to decode their responses. David, Tyler called urgently. Multiple corporate boards are convening emergency sessions. They're voting to implement ethical compliance protocols, but the methodology matches known control patterns. Of course it does, Reynolds said. They're trying to use the old system to contain the damage from exposing the system, but it won't work anymore, not now that people can recognize the signs. David's phone lit up with another alert. This one from store number 291. The security cameras showed hundreds of people gathered, sharing stories of how they'd been targeted over the years. The Sunrise logo glowed above them, now a symbol of exposure and resistance. "Sir," his assistant reported, "we're getting calls from ethics professors, psychological researchers, corporate governance experts. They want to study the targeting system, not to use it, but to help people recognize and resist it." David watched as the movement continued to grow. What had started with overheard whispers in a drive-thru had evolved into a global awakening. People weren't just learning about corruption. They were learning to recognize how it identified and broke its strongest opponents. "They'll try to stop this," Reynolds warned. "The system has defenders at every level of corporate and government power." "Let them try," David replied. "You can't unring this bell. Every person who recognizes their own targeting becomes a new source of exposure. The machine that breaks good people just became visible to everyone it tried to break." His phone buzzed. One final time, a message from an unknown number. "Some systems are too big to fail." David typed back, "No, they're just too big to hide anymore." 1 week after exposing the targeting system, David sat in his childhood home's study, surrounded by evidence of a battle that had spread far beyond the restaurant industry. His father's journals were open on the desk, but his attention was focused on the multiple screens showing worldwide developments. "The resistance is organizing," Lisa reported, displaying a global map dotted with activity centers. "Former targets are creating support networks in every major industry. They're calling themselves integrity networks, using the system's own profiling methods to identify and protect potential whistleblowers before they can be compromised." Tyler's security feeds showed similar patterns emerging across corporate landscapes. Major companies are hemorrhaging mid-level executives, not from firing, but from awakening. Once people recognize how they were manipulated, they can't unsee it. "Look at this," Marcus called, highlighting a particular trend. Every time a corporation tries to implement new ethical compliance measures, their own employees analyze it against the targeting playbook we exposed. They're immunizing themselves against manipulation. David's secure phone rang. The FBI task force commander with an update. "Martinez, we've uncovered something big. The targeting system wasn't just used by corporations. We found evidence of government agencies using it to identify and neutralize potential internal whistleblowers. This goes all the way to national security levels." "That's why they're moving now," Reynolds interjected from his protective custody. He pointed to a pattern of suspicious financial transactions Tyler had flagged. "Look at these emergency board meetings, the sudden policy changes. They're not just trying to stop the exposure, they're trying to prevent people from recognizing how deep the manipulation goes. Jake burst in with urgent news from store No. 291. David, something's happening. The gatherings at our restaurants. And they're evolving. People aren't just sharing stories anymore. They're organizing systematic resistance. Former targets are teaching others how to recognize manipulation attempts. The screens showed similar scenes playing out worldwide. The very methodology that had been used to break ethical individuals was now being used to identify and protect them. "Sir," his assistant called through the secure line, "you need to see this. Conway's been found dead in his cell. Apparent suicide, but nothing's apparent anymore." David finished. He turned to Reynolds. "They're cleaning house, aren't they? Eliminating everyone who knows the full scope of the targeting program." Reynolds nodded grimly. Conway was just the visible part, the real power behind the system. They operate at a level most people never see, and they're preparing to strike back. Dud. Tyler's security alerts suddenly spiked. Massive coordinated action detected across multiple sectors. They're not just attacking our networks anymore, they're implementing something called Protocol Omega Reset. Lisa's financial monitors erupted with alerts. Global market manipulation. They're creating artificial crises in multiple industries simultaneously. The same playbook they use to break individuals, but on a macro scale. Of course, Reynolds realized. They're trying to force a choice. Accept the old system of control, or watch the global economy collapse. It's the same false dichotomy they used to break people like your father. Make the ethical choice seem impossible. David watched as the crisis unfolded. Stock markets plunged, supply chains faltered, corporations began emergency lockdowns. The machine that broke good people was making its last, desperate attempt to maintain control. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You can still stop this. Some systems exist because the alternative is chaos. Make the practical choice like your father did." But something else was happening. On Tyler's monitors, they watched as employees across industries began responding, not with panic but with organized resistance. "Si, isuti decentes dicta." "Look at this," Lisa said wonderingly. "Every crisis they manufacture is being met with systematic exposure. People aren't just recognizing the manipulation, they're actively countering it." Marcus pulled up social media feeds. The integrity. Networks are sharing real-time analysis of corporate responses. They're using the targeting system's own methodology to predict and prevent manipulation attempts. "That's why they're so desperate," Reynolds said quietly. "The system doesn't just control people. It depends on their willing participation once they're broken. But what happens when people refuse to break?" David's phone lit up with another alert, this one from store No. 291's security cameras. The gathering there had grown massive, but it wasn't chaotic. Former targets were organizing others, teaching them to recognize manipulation tactics, creating support systems for whistleblowers. His assistant's voice came through urgently. "Sir, something unprecedented is happening. Corporate employees worldwide are demanding transparency audits. They're using their understanding of the targeting system to identify and expose potential manipulation before it can take root." David watched as the movement continued to evolve. What had started with a simple, overheard conversation in a drive-thru had become a global awakening. People weren't just resisting corruption, they were systematically dismantling the machinery that enabled it. "They'll try something bigger," Reynolds warned. "The system won't go down without unleashing everything it has." "Let them try," David replied, picking up his father's earliest journal, the one that documented his first recognition of corruption before he was broken by it. "They can only manipulate people who don't understand how they're being manipulated," and that weapon doesn't work anymore. His phone buzzed one final time, not a threat now, but a desperate plea. You don't understand what you've done. The system maintains order. David typed back, no, it maintained control. There's a difference, and people can finally see it. 1 month after the global exposure of the targeting system, David Martinez stood in the drive-thru lane of store number 291, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The restaurant looked different now, not just a location, but a symbol of resistance and renewal. The final numbers are in, Lisa reported, joining him in the parking lot. 87 major corporations have undergone complete leadership changes. Over 3,000 executives worldwide have stepped down after acknowledging they were compromised by the targeting system. And the integrity networks have established chapters in 43 countries. Tyler approached with his laptop showing real-time data. The new transparency protocols are working. Every attempt at corporate manipulation gets flagged and exposed instantly. They can't break people who understand how they're being targeted. More than that, Marcus added, the support networks are identifying potential whistleblowers before they can be compromised. The system that broke good people is now protecting them instead. David's phone lit up with a message from the FBI task force. Final report complete. Targeting system traced to 12 major financial institutions, 8 government agencies, and a network of corporate consultants, all now under investigation. Reynolds's testimony proved crucial. Inside store, the McC 291, now reopened and thriving, the walls told a new story. Photos and documents chronicled both the corruption and the resistance, serving as a reminder and a warning. The drive-thru window where David had first overheard suspicious whispers now displayed a plaque, where truth spoke louder than power. Jake approached with the morning's reports. Every Sunrise Burgers location is showing record customer loyalty. People aren't just coming for the food, they're coming because we stood for something. Speaking of standing for something, Lisa interjected, showing David her tablet. The Whistleblower Protection Act amendments just passed. Full immunity and support for anyone who exposes corporate manipulation. They're calling it the Martinez Protocol. David smiled at the irony. His father's name had become associated with corruption, but his sons would be linked to protecting those who fought against it. His phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor Conway's daughter. Found Mom's final recording. She said your father tried to warn her at the end, said some systems deserve to burn, no matter the cost. Thank you for finishing what they couldn't. Sir, his assistant called from the restaurant entrance. They're ready for you. Inside, the restaurant had been prepared for a different kind of gathering. Former targets from across industries had assembled to launch something new. The Integrity Foundation, dedicated to identifying and protecting ethical individuals before they could be compromised. The sunrise burns those who look directly at it. David began his address, quoting the warning that had once been used to threaten silence. But that's exactly what we had to do. Look directly at the corruption, understand how it targeted good people, and refuse to let it continue. He gestured to the walls of evidence and testimony. My father was broken by this system, turned into a tool to break others. But his story, and all of yours, taught us something crucial. Manipulation only works in darkness. When we understand how we're being targeted, we can stand together against it. Through the windows, he could see more people gathering. Employees, customers, supporters of the movement that had started with one overheard conversation and grown into global change. The old system identified ethical people as threats to be neutralized, David continued. Our new network identifies them as strengths to be protected. Every person who stands against corruption makes it harder for corruption to stand at all. His phone buzzed one final time. An anonymous message. Some systems can't be defeated. David typed back, they already have been, by everyone who refuses to be broken. Later that evening, as the sun set on another day of transformation, David sat in his father's old study. The journals were still there, but they were no longer secrets to be hidden. They were lessons to be learned, warnings to be heeded. He opened his father's earliest journal, reading the words of a young manager who first noticed corruption and wanted to fight it. Before the targeting, before the manipulation, before the compromise. On the last page, he wrote his own entry. The sunrise doesn't just burn those who look at it, it illuminates what they need to see. And once seen, corruption loses its power to corrupt. That's the real legacy we choose to build. Outside, the Sunrise Burgers logo glowed against the darkening sky, no longer a symbol of hidden corruption, but a beacon of resistance and renewal. In drive-thrus and boardrooms across the world, people who once whispered in fear now spoke with strength, knowing they weren't alone. The system that broke good people had finally been broken itself, replaced by something stronger. The united will of those who refuse to be broken again.